in oiled ringlets, looked uncomfortable as he complained. "My lord, I don't know what else you want me to tell you." Tyrion leaned forward in his chair. "I want you to explain what happened at Harrenhal. What is it about that request that's causing you problems?" The man cocked his head. "As I said, your lord father won a great victory at Harrenhal. Took the castle with no problems. With the young wolf defeated it was child's play." "Really?" Tyrion's face was stony. "I'd have thought that Robb Stark's massive army would have presented some problems." "Ah, yes my lord," the man replied, "but once we'd pushed the enemy back and the army from the Vale arrived, we surrounded the foe and annihilated the Starks." He shared a smile with the small group with him, a motley group of exotic warriors and stoic soldiers. "It was a glorious thing. Finally. That Stark brat has been brought low. Joffrey will be delighted." Cersei could have hugged herself. "I was right all along to put my faith in father." "I don't doubt it," Tyrion replied, his eyes narrow. "Why then is your force here?" "According to my father's plan the army was to push on and take Riverrun. I'd have thought you'd have been more used there." "Don't know about plans my lord." Adrienne spoke doubtfully. "I'm nothing but the company's paymaster. I'm a simple soldier. I go where I'm sent." "Which begs the question of why you're the one speaking to us." Tyrion responded dryly, looking over the men around Adrienne. "If the Golden Company has been sent here, where is your Captain General? Where is Harry Strickland?" "Beg pardon my lord," Gorys said mournfully. "But Strickland was killed. Run through by an enemy spear as we charged the Stark line. Such a tragedy." Varys spoke up from his seat at the table. "Such a brave man. We will feel his tragic loss keenly." The men of the Golden Company murmured their agreement, though without much conviction. "Agreed," Tyrion said, glancing at the eunuch before returning his gaze to the end of the table. "So who is the new Captain General?" "You. One of these fine gentlemen here." Adrienne smiled thinly. "We haven't had time to appoint a new leader yet my lord. Now that we will have a short lull in our marching we will deal with that issue." Tyrion looked dissatisfied. Her brother merely tapped his fingers on the heavy oak table in front of him as he considered what he had been told. His eyes looked over a scroll that had been delivered by Grand Maester Pycelle earlier. A message from their father. Cersei was restless. What did it matter if their sellsword leader was dead? They are sellswords. They are paid to die in our service. They'll just promote one of their own and move on. Surely we have more important things to do than dwell on the loss of one man. After a long moment Tyrion looked up at the sellswords. "So you mean to tell me that you marched all the way back to the capital with no idea of what to do when you arrived?" The cadaverous man at the foot of the table bowed his head slightly. "Not quite my lord. We were informed that Queen Daenerys was to arrive soon and that we were to combine with her and the army of Dawn to attack Storm's End." The man let out a laugh. "I assume it's here in the south, otherwise your lord father would never have ordered us back here." "Quite," Tyrion responded slowly. "He knows this." Cersei fumed. "Father's letter said as much. We are to wait for Uncle Kevan to arrive and then to combine forces with Daenerys Targaryen and the Dornish and then proceed to strike at Robert's younger brother. What is causing the little ingrate so much trouble?" "Perhaps it would be best if we wait for Sir Kevan to arrive my lord." Varys said, "Your uncle cannot be far behind the Golden Company." Tyrion did not appear to have heard the Master of Whisperers. The Queen's brother merely looked down at the letter in front of him again, lost in thought. Cersei had had enough. Someone has to take charge. She turned her head to Varys. "And where are the rest of our allies?" "The Dornish and the Targaryen girl." The eunuch simpered slightly. "At last report your grace, Daenerys Targaryen had left Pentos and was sailing here. I expect her to be with us shortly. Little bitch. Hastening to grasp her crown. And the Dornish. My little birds tell me that Prince Doran is marching up the Boneway as we speak. He will invade the Stormlands within a week and draw Stannis Baratheon's forces to the south so that we may invade from the north with the Golden Company and the Targaryen army." "Excellent," Cersei said smugly. "We'll crush the usurper between our two forces." With Stannis and Robb Stark gone, we will return to the uncontested power in the Seven Kingdoms. She was about to speak when Tyrion roused himself. Thank you, gentlemen. That will be all. Gorys Adrian stepped forward. What of our request to be able to send men into the city? Camp life is awfully dull. Tyrion paused for a moment and then nodded. I see no reason to deny your men the freedom of the city. Small parties if you please. We don't want the city watch getting nervous. Adrian bowed his head. Grateful, my lord. And as for this month's pay? Cersei's eyes blazed. Jumped up peasant. How dare he think to ask for money from his betters? Her brother offered a genial smile, but of course. I will have the pay delivered to your camp by the western wall. Through the old gate. Adrian looked at his companions who nodded their consent, before returning Tyrion's gaze. I am obliged, my lord. The crown thanks you for your service. The men bowed before trooping out of the room. The heavy wooden door closed firmly behind them. Insufferable wretches, Grand Maester Pycelle muttered from his seat, thinking to make demands from the crown at such a time. We need the men, Grand Maester. Varys reminded him. They are expensive to be sure, but the money is well spent. Cersei rolled her eyes. Well spent. They look to have run from the battlefield. Not so, your grace, I assure you. Varys soothed. It would certainly seem that Robb Stark has been defeated. Either captured or killed. The army to the north has been routed and Harrenhal taken. Why are they here then? The aged Maester grumbled. I was sure that Lord Tywine meant to press the advantage north. I'm sure the Lord Hand's letter explains his actions. Varys said smoothly, with the northern and Riverland forces routed, I'm sure Lord Tywine wishes to pacify the south, to deal with Lord Stannis and the Reach. For that I imagine Queen Daenerys will need the Golden Company and your Lord Uncle. No doubt that is why he has sent the company to us. They will be well rested and ready for when our new queen arrives. Cersei felt anger coiling inside her at the mention of the Targaryen girl being called a queen. Why do we need the girl now? If Robb Stark is defeated and the Vale is on our side, we can smash our enemies without her. She saw Tyrion shoot a wry look at the eunuch before he turned in his seat to look at the wall behind him. You will facilitate the moving of the gold from the Red Keep to the Old Gate. The sellsword Bronn lounged against the wall of the council chamber. He was picking his teeth with a small piece of chicken bone. His free hand rested ideally on the pommel of his sheathed sword. I. He replied with a bored voice. Tyrion looked sternly at him. Take only what you need from the treasury. I want no pilfering from the city. We're in dire financial straits as it is. Bronn threw a knowing glance at Cersei's brother. Not to worry. The money will get there as promised. It's the portion you take out of the treasury that doesn't make it to the Golden Company that interests me. The commander of the Gold Cloaks adopted a face of complete innocence. Are you accusing me of profiting from my position? Tyrion did not look amused. We both know you're guilty of that and far worse. Fair enough. Bronn said with a mild shrug as he pushed off from the wall. I'll get to it then, shall I? If you would be so kind. Tyrion said with a small smile. Bronn gave a slight bow and then walked to a side door, stepping out into the corridor beyond. Unacceptable conduct, your grace. Pycelle uttered from his chair. To have such a rogue as him in charge of the Gold Cloaks is an insult to. I have a soft spot in my heart for rogues, Tyrion declared. At least Bronn is exactly as he appears without putting on a mummer's farce of being something he is not. Lord Slynt was far more suited to the role, the aged Maester grumbled. Janos Slynt was a corrupt coward. Tyrion shot back, who murdered children. He's lucky that all I did to him was have him sent to the wall. Slynt was a loyal servant. Cersei retorted, he did exactly what was asked of him. He knew his place. Tyrion turned his odd eyes upon her, and now his place is with the Night's Watch. He can be a loyal servant to them. Cersei felt her face harden. Who does he think he is? Her brother turned to the table. Well, it would seem that our Lord Father's plans are somewhat of a mystery. We shall have to wait for my uncle to arrive. He regarded the other council members. Any other business? No one said anything. After a quick glance around the table, Tyrion nodded. Then thank you all. This meeting is adjourned. Varys and Pycelle stood and made to walk from the room. Cersei shot another hateful glance at her brother before gracefully standing. "Stay." The voice was so low that Cersei wasn't sure she had heard her brother speak, much less what he said. Her brother wasn't looking at her but had returned his eyes to the parchment before him. "He thinks to give me orders. Does he think me some kind of dog he can order around at will?" She was determined to leave, to deny her wayward brother the advantage, but there had been something in his voice that stayed her hand, stopped her from moving away from the table. Varys had already left the room in a swish of silken robes. Pycelle took longer as he ambled slowly towards the door, his arms full of scrolls that he had brought with him to the meeting. No doubt in a ridiculous attempt to appear learned. In order to pass the time and not look a fool, Cersei walked over to a serving table and poured herself a goblet of Arbor Red. As the rich liquid flowed from the decanter and the heady aroma reached her nostrils, she realized that there must be fewer limited supply left of such a vintage left in the city. A pity. The war has taken a toll on even this. At last the Grand Maester crossed the threshold of the chamber. A Kingsguard knight, Cersei could not remember who was on duty today, looked in to confirm that the Queen and her brother did not require assistance before pulling the door closed. Tyrion wasted no time. With a heave he pulled himself from his chair and lowered himself the short distance to the floor. He looked up at her as he walked onto a balcony overlooking the city. "Come with me." Outraged at his impertinence but intrigued at the tone of urgency, Cersei followed her brother out onto the balcony. The imp leaned against the balustrade, the red stone almost coming up to his chin. Tyrion seemed to peer over the railing to the city below before turning back to her. "I hope we can talk out here, but with the amount of spies making a living in the Red Keep you never know. We best be quick." Cersei idly sipped from her goblet as she moved to join him at the railing. "Who do you think is spying on us right now?" "My principal concern is one of Varys' little birds," Tyrion replied, gazing up at her, casually. "What?" "That cockless wretch would never dare to spy on us," Cersei declared. "Please," Tyrion scoffed, "Varys spies on everyone. That has never been a concern of mine, until today." "What is so different about today?" Cersei inquired, bored beyond the telling. "He thinks he's so clever, as if it was groundbreaking information that a spy master spies on people. True, Varys should know better than to spy on us, but still." "Wait a moment, sweet sister, we should know momentarily." She felt her patience wearing thin. "What?" Inside the council chamber a door opened and Cersei heard someone moving quietly towards the balcony. She felt her grip tightening on the golden goblet in her hands. Abruptly Bronn appeared at the entry to the balcony. Cersei let out a breath she wasn't aware she'd been holding. "The little monster has made me paranoid." She glared at the sellsword and would have given him a stern rebuke were it not for the fact that the man looked worried. "Well?" Tyrion asked, his eyes locked on Bronn. The sellsword gave a sigh, his eyes promised danger. "You were right." Tyrion leaned back against the balcony railing. His eyes went up and looked at the clear sky. "Fuck," he said softly as he closed his eyes. Cersei was confused and the perplexity fed her anger. "Right. Right about what?" "We have been betrayed, sister," her brother said as he opened his eyes and focused them on her. "The Golden Company is not here on any errand from father." "What?" Cersei was stunned. She stood stock still, surprise rendering her incapable of anything further. She gathered her wits. "Why then are they here? Did they flee the battle?" Tyrion looked from Bronn to his sister. "I don't know what has become of our force in the Riverlands." He took a deep breath. "I haven't heard from father for several days. His host left camp outside Antlers and was looking to strike Robb Stark's army yesterday morning. Since then nothing has been heard from our forces. Has he taken leave of what little sense he had?" "We have heard from father," Cersei stormed. "The letter you've had in front of you for the last few hours was written by father after the battle." "The letter is a fake," Tyrion stated calmly, looking out over the city. On the horizon, out to the west, the sun was starting to set slowly. "The last real correspondence I had from father was the night before last." "What?" Cersei's mind spun. "The letter carries father's seal." "That of the Hand of the King?" "Oh yes," Tyrion replied, nodding slightly, and the handwriting of the letter is near perfect match for father's. Be that as it may, the letter is a fraud. She looked dubiously at him. How can you know this? Tyrion looked at her. I arranged with father that his own personal seal, the seal of House Lannister, would be included on the inside of any letter sent, so as to verify the authenticity of its contents. There was no seal in this letter. That is proof of nothing. Cersei snorted, you're becoming scared of shadows and the wind. The letter, in and of itself, is suspicious, though not too worrying. Tyrion allowed, but what is more damning is the story we just heard. Story? You mean from the sellswords? Quite. Tyrion looked ruefully across the city. Father is a sound tactician, but even he would struggle to overcome Robb Stark's battle-hardened army. The Vale. Yes, yes. Tyrion said, waving a hand dismissively at her. I know what the letter and Adrienne said. That the Vale Knights, under Baelish, arrived and smashed the Stark host. Drove the young wolf from the field. Exactly. Cersei said, slightly breathlessly. He brother regarded her. Does it not strike you as at all convenient that Baelish arrived when he did? Not at all. She replied, father planned it that way. You could well be right. Tyrion responded, crossing his arms, again, suspicious but not conclusive. However, ordering the Golden Company south to us now makes no sense. It made perfect sense to Cersei. He wants us to destroy Stannis, protect our back from the usurper. Now it was her brother who snorted, please. Father was quite content to leave Stannis Baratheon where he was. Now, after supposedly a major victory over our enemies, with the road clear to attack Riverrun and then onwards to lift the siege of Casterly Rock, we're expected to believe that father has sent his most experienced force south to deal with a man who has shown no intention of leaving his own lands. Dorne is now moving to support us. Cersei argued. Dorne fights for Dorne. Tyrion said sharply, father knew better than any of us that Prince Doran will only be compelled to fight for us with the arrival of Daenerys Targaryen. The imp spread his hands wide, as you can see, she isn't here. But she will be. Cersei said, panic and confusion warring within her. Her eyes darted over her brother's face. Varys assures us she will be here any day now. Her brother's face became a mask. A cold, intelligent expression that looked to be making a million calculations. Is she? I see no evidence of that. Cersei reeled, but the letters could have been written by anyone. Tyrion finished with a look of regret in his eyes. In any case, it hardly matters, the girl may arrive or she may not. Either way we have a more pressing problem. The Golden Company. Bronn interjected. Tyrion nodded to the sellsword in thanks. Indeed. Right now we have the better part of 8,000 men camped outside the city walls whose intentions are unknown. Her mind raced. Even if the letter is fake, the Golden Company may just be following orders. They may be unwitting catspaws of whatever deception you think is being played. That was why I summoned their leaders. Tyrion said, I wanted to hear what the men had to say for themselves. As you heard, they supported the words of the letter, words that I happen to distrust. 7 hells. Cersei raged, you're responsible for bringing them here to Westeros in the first place. You know them. I knew Harry Strickland. Tyrion shot back, I negotiated for the Golden Company services through him and have worked with the man after they arrived in Westeros. I like to think we have a rapport. However, it appears he's now dead. I don't know who's in charge. Cersei stared in shock. Does that matter? They are sellswords, they fight for gold. It's not just that. Her brother looked over to Bronn. He sighed, tell her. The sellsword settled himself against a wall. With a wary eye on the chamber he spoke. His lordship here asked me to send a few of my most loyal lads, maybe with a few accommodating ladies, out to the city wall to spy on our new guests. It seemed prudent, Tyrion cut in, given my confusion as to why they were here in the first place. Well, you were right, Bronn said, impressed. I've just spoken to them. There's at least 7,000 of the fuckers camped just beyond the wall. No wounded amongst them, or at least none that my boys and girls could see. What does that prove? Cersei hissed. Can't you see? Tyrion asked. It's the number that worries me. And the fact there are no wounded among them. Wounded? Cersei was confused. Bronn said, scratching the back of his head with a gloved hand. His lordship's right again. There were no medical tents or wounded. Not only that, but the Solidus armor is clean, dirty to be sure and worn from proper use, but other than that nothing that. Speak sense. Cersei stormed. What does any of this matter? It matters. Tyrion said, as if addressing a small child. Because the army just outside our walls are supposed to have been in a pitched battle the day before yesterday. A battle in which they fought so hard that their captain general fell. And yet the casualties were relatively light, almost not existent. The Golden Company left here with close to 8,000 men. Cersei reminded him. The fact your spies indicated that their number is now around 7 would seem to indicate that they took plenty of casualties. Father Letter didn't mention that he'd split the force. Besides, even allowing for the fact that the injured got left with Father. Tyrion muttered, it still doesn't account for how the fighting men have no wounds, even shallow ones. That their equipment is relatively clean and undamaged. Her brother spun on his heel and looked down on King's Landing as if he could see the Golden Company outside the walls. No, I knew the moment they arrived that the company had not seen action. They had arrived here too quickly from the battle. They were too well ordered to have been in combat. The Golden Company is renowned for discipline, but the idea that they could engage the Starks, win the battle unscathed, conquer Harrenhal and then march here in full formation within such a short space of time is ridiculous. Cersei drained her goblet. Why then are they here? Tyrion looked at her, his brow furrowed in confusion. I don't know. She scoffed, some hand you are. Tyrion glared at her. He turned his head. Thank you, Bronn. Please leave me to talk to my sister alone. The sellsword shrugged before re-entering the chamber. Tyrion waited until he could hear the door on the far side of the chamber open and then close. What we do know, he said slowly, is that the company was with Father the night before the battle with the Starks. As of today we don't have any indication what happened. Cersei paled. You think we might not have won the battle? Jaime was there. Her brother pursed his lips. Of course, we have to consider the possibility. Here are our sellswords without a scratch on them, and we have heard no word from Father or any of our trusted allies saying what happened. Even my message to Antlers has received no response. We should send scouts, rather than ravens. Cersei declared, and why doesn't Varys know what is going on? He's supposed to know all. Tyrion slammed the palm of his hand onto his forehead. He looked at her with an expression of terrible pain. I'd have, though the answer was obvious. Our Master of Whisperers is playing his own game. Cersei merely looked at him silently. Consider. Tyrion said, dropping his hand and beginning to pace the balcony. Here we have our sellswords camped outside our walls under dubious circumstances. Contact with lands outside our immediate vicinity has been cut off, and we have counterfeit information regarding our one loyal army out in the field. A very troubling state of affairs, to be sure, and yet our spymaster reports that all is well. That everything is going swimmingly, and that we shouldn't be concerned that armies commanded by people who have reasons to hate us are potentially massing on our doorstep. He stopped his pacing. By rights Varys should be jumping up and down, but he is going out of his way to show that nothing is wrong. Cersei's eyes misted over with rage. Then we should order his arrest. Arrange a sneak attack on the Golden Company if you think they are our enemy. Her brother's brow furrowed so much she wondered that the creases in his head didn't become permanent. With what men? The company has at least 7,000 experienced warriors. After the battle with Stannis we only have 2,500 gold cloaks. Father sent out for reinforcements from the Crown lands. Cersei said, remembering. And he got them. Tyrion replied shortly. But then he took the majority of the men north with him. He left merely 500 here. With my mountain clansmen I estimate we could just about field 3,000 men, maybe a few hundred more. That should be enough. Cersei seethed, we can catch them by surprise. Arrest or kill them all before they become a threat. The Golden Company is renowned for being an efficient fighting force. Tyrion said, that is, after all, why I hired them. All we have is a few thousand thugs in gold cloaks. They would never stand against such an opponent. She sighed exasperatedly. Well then, lure them into the city. Find them at the taverns and brothels and arrest them a group at a time. Tyrion gave no sign he had heard. Eager to shake him out of his stupor, she spoke again. Well, we must fight them, she stated. Have Bronn ready some loyal men. Even if I thought that was a good idea, which I don't, Tyrion muttered slowly, there's no guarantee that we'll be successful in gathering even a handful of men to our banner. Why do you say that? Tyrion offered her a crooked smile. You remember your little trick with Janos Slynt? Ned Stark thought he watched loyalty, but the man was bought and paid for by Littlefinger. I have no idea where the loyalty of the Gold Cloaks lies. He paused. You were right, Bronn is a sellsword, and he has always made clear to me that he goes with the employer with the most money. Who knows what inducements have been offered him and the other commanders? Gritting her teeth in frustration, Cersei reflected on her brother's words. Finally she spoke out, well, isolate a few of the commanders and sound out their loyalties. How long do you think it would take for Varys to catch on if we tried that? Tyrion said, shaking his head. You assume that he's become a turncloak, Cersei spat. Fear and paranoia is getting the better of you, little brother. You see enemies everywhere. Seven hells, he doesn't even trust his own pet sellsword. You might be right, Tyrion conceded. But I think not. Ab sent a letter from father saying to the contrary. I'm acting on the assumption that our army was defeated and that Varys and the Golden Company are now the enemy. We are surrounded by foes with no real prospect of escape. It was too much. Cersei felt her legs growing weak, her breathing became ragged as the full implications of what her brother was saying hit her. She leaned against the railing. We may have lost control of the city. Another thought hit her, Jaime. What has happened to Jaime? If he was hurt or injured, she was sure she would know. But what if I didn't? She felt her eyes moisten. Angrily she blinked back the start of tears as she looked up. Tyrion was watching her tentatively, seemingly torn between genuine concern and mocking. His expression only fueled her embarrassment and rage. What do you propose to do then, you idiot? Cersei cried, ignoring Tyrion's quick gestures to lower her voice. She ignored him. If we can't arrest or attack the enemy, then what is to be done? Joffrey, Tommen. I must get them out of the city. Be quiet. He hissed angrily. I will not be quiet. Cersei raged, her face flushing with anger. If you're right, we must make steps to flee. He looked at her with his uneven eyes. Where would you take them? Where now is safe? She felt sweat beading on her brow. Her hand gripping the goblet now hurt with the pressure she was exerting. Her jaw hurt from clenching it so hard. We must be calm, Tyrion said, taking her arm. If we let on that we are aware that something is wrong, then our enemies might move before we are ready. Ready? He's gone completely insane. What can we possibly do to combat this? You're telling me that we can't even trust our men? What can we do? Her thoughts went back to the night of Stannis' attack on King's Landing. Of the poison she'd had Pycelle provide her. It had taken all her courage to make Tommen swallow half before ingesting the remainder herself. It hadn't worked that night. But, by the gods, I'll die before I'll let my enemies take me. She saw her brother looking at her oddly. He finally broke eye contact and he gave her a smile. We have a little time, Cersei, there may still be a way out of this. Time. She almost screamed at him, her heart was hammering in her chest. What time do you think we have? A little, Tyrion said, but maybe more than you suppose. Clearly, the company isn't here to sack the city, or they would have done so already. He spread his hands. It's not as though we could do a lot to stop them. He nodded. No, they are waiting for something or someone. Hopefully we can fool them into complacency, blind them to the fact we're onto them. Hopefully give us time to work out a plan of escape. Cersei felt a terrible weariness come over her. She could barely wrap her head around what her brother was saying. She looked at her Tyrion, bizarrely taking a small measure of comfort in his ugly face. It's a worthy trick, Tyrion, escaping a trap as it's closing in all around you. Her brother offered her a wide smile. Trick. Come now, my dear sister, tricks are my bread and butter. Stick with me and we may yet survive this. Chapter 49, Eddard 2. Chapter text. Bloody thing fell on me, bastard almost crushed me to death. He smiled thinly, I am relieved that it didn't. The old knight chuckled, well I could have done without the beast wriggling around in pain. Made a right mess of my leg. He winced as he leaned over to the side of his bed and took a goblet of water from a small table. I know how that is. Eddard looked down at the bandaged limb. Gods know I have endured enough problems with my leg for a lifetime. Are you in a great deal of pain? Brynden Tully shook his head. Not at the moment. Lewin gave me some milk of the poppy. Right now my only fear is that it will wear off before I get my next dose. He took a sip of water from the goblet. I want to thank you for finding me, Ned. I expected to either die in the cold or have some looters slit my throat. That would never have happened, Brynden. Ned said firmly, your family. I would not have rested until you were found. Besides, I've posted men around the battlefield to deter looters. Bad enough to be injured in the fight without being killed by thieves. Good thinking, lad, the Blackfish said. There are many others out there not as lucky as I. Lucky? Ned cast an eye over the battered and bruised figure of the old knight who lay on a bed before him with his head and shoulders propped up by pillows. What do the healers say? Ned asked softly, indicating the leg. Brynden said, tutting quietly, you know how they are. Lewin tells me it's a clean break. He and the others have set the bone and tell me that, God's willing, it should mend properly though the muscles are shredded. Hopefully, given time, I can retain some semblance of use from the old bugger. He smiled ruefully, though I fear my days of dancing are now over. Were you ever much of a dancer? Ned asked, raising an eyebrow in mock incredulity. Maybe not, the other man allowed, humor in his eyes. Attending balls and feasts was usually just an excuse to drink. Well, look at it this way, Ned said, you have more reason than ever to partake in that now. Brynden laughed, brightening, well there's that certainly. His eyes took on a sudden mournful expression. How many boys did we lose? Too many. They are still being counted now, but we're saving all we can. Ned said with what he hoped was a reassuring tone. But the Lannister host was completely routed, there is nothing between us and King's Landing. The Blackfish nodded. Then we should press on as soon as we're able. Take the capital before they can regroup. I've already sent out small hosts to take the surrounding land, Ned assured him. Antlers has fallen and is under the command of Lord Forrester. Lord Blackwood is marching on Rook's Rest and Lord Royce advances towards Duskendale. You always were clever, Ned Tully smiled, closing his eyes so as best to visualize the dispositions being described to him. You mean to cut the Lannisters' lines of supply? Ned didn't need to respond to that. Instead he said, King's Landing remains a big city with a host of sorts inside. It would be best that they are cut off from any support. He frowned. Any support? He repeated. You're worried about the force that fled Forrester's flank? Brynden said, giving his niece's husband a knowing look. Ned wasn't surprised. Even from his sickbed, the Blackfish was clearly keeping himself abreast of rumors involving the army. You've heard the scouts report that a unit broke away from the fighting and headed south. Tully nodded at him. Damn odd to flee when the battle's just getting started, but I've seen odder behavior in my time. We have yet to identify where they went. Ned said quietly. The Blackfish considered, they are probably deserters, Ned. My advice is to march on King's Landing and take the city. While minding your flanks, of course. Ned agreed. The sooner we can be off the better. Has Kat arrived yet? Brynden asked innocently. She's not been to see me. Ned was not fooled by the old man's play at innocence. Kat's not arrived yet. She's expected soon. The Blackfish looked pointedly at him. Does she know you're alive and well and leading her son's army? Ned felt a flash of concern. I'm not leading anything. I am merely attending to matters while Robb is injured. Lewin tells me that he's up on his feet and we'll discuss things through this afternoon. Peace, Tully said, raising a hand to stop Ned. I'm not accusing you of anything. He furrowed his brow, though I notice you didn't answer my question. She doesn't know. Ned admitted apprehensively, I didn't think it was something I could put in a letter. Brynden nodded slightly, probably wise. should be done face to face. A lot has changed since you two last saw each other. I'm well aware. The injured man looked lost in his own thoughts. To think, little Caitlin, the Lady of Riverrun. It was a shock to me as well, Ned said. But she had no choice. Brynden explained, sensing Ned's disquiet. Robb was injured and she was host as heir. If she had declined the position and Robb had then died, it would have gone to Lysa. That would have been a disaster, especially with Littlefinger whispering in Lysa's ears, pulling the strings like a master puppeteer. She and I will have a lot to discuss. I don't doubt she will be enraged at me not getting word to her about Sansa and Arya. Brynden looked sympathetic. Don't worry, lad. Cat will be shocked to be sure, maybe even angry, but she'll get over it. Especially when she sees her two girls. They are here, aren't they? He felt himself smile. Arrived here an hour ago. They're just being shown their rooms and then I'll bring them to see you. The Blackfish smiled. It would be good to. There was a loud knocking on the chamber door, the flimsy wood rocking on its rusted hinges. Ned turned in his chair as Brynden bellowed, "Come in." "Damn your eyes." The door opened slowly, the person on the other side clearly humbled by the Blackfish's admonition. Ned swiveled to see Gendry's earnest blue eyes peering through the doorway from the corridor outside. "Come in, Gendry. Don't mind the Blackfish. His bark is worse than his bite." Ned's squire entered the room, his head bowed. "Apologies, my lords. But I thought you'd want to know that Lady Caitlin has arrived." He shot to his feet. "Why didn't you come to find me earlier?" he asked, anger flaring. The boy looked ashamed. "I'm sorry, my lord, I had no idea where you were. This castle is huge." Ned had to grant him that. "Curses, I thought I'd have more time to prepare myself." He knew this was nothing more than self-deception. No amount of time could prepare me for this. Ned wanted nothing more than to see his wife again, but he was uncertain how she'd react. It was time to find out. "Go and meet her, Gendry, ask her to come to my chambers. Don't mention my name, just say you have instructions to collect her." Cat won't like being told that. Brynden grumbled from his bed as they watched Gendry leave, being ordered around with little information. Better that than to have the reunion in the yard where everyone can see. "I suppose," the Blackfish said. He smiled. "Then again, it saves our current commander from losing face when his lady wife gives him a dressing down." He has a point, Ned thought as he made for the door. His wife's uncle called after him, detecting his concerns. "Don't worry, lad. You and Caitlin will be fine." Ned nodded. "Thank you, Brynden." The Blackfish seemed content. He leaned over to put his goblet back on the bedside table. "Thank you for coming to see me. I'm grateful for the talk. The silent sisters who come to change my dressing are terrible conversationalists." Ned laughed at that, for the first time in many days. He smiled warmly at Brynden as he reached for the brass doorknob. "I will see you at the meeting." The Blackfish returned the smile. "Wouldn't miss it, lad. Not for all the wine in the arbor." Ned stood gazing out his chamber window that looked out at the God's Eye. The water glowed in the midday sun, making the cool depths shine. From this height he could almost make out the island in the middle of the massive lake. He had never been there but had often wondered what it must be like. To live in seclusion with the world going on all around you. Much like my experiences in the Vale. At least there I was injured and didn't realize how long the world turned without me being a part of it. "Do not lie to me, young man." Ned turned as he heard a voice echoing in the stone corridor leading to his chamber door. He would have recognized his wife's voice anywhere, even with the vast time and distance they'd been apart. "I assure you, my lady, I do not require your assurances. I tell you that I saw the sigils of House Redfort and Waynwood in the yard. They are Vale houses. I demand to know what they are doing here. Has the Vale joined us? Is my sister here?" Ned repressed a sigh. It was to be expected that Caitlin would assume that her sister had sent the Vale forces to aid them. That she had finally answered her sister's and nephew's entreaties for help. Sadly, nothing is further from the truth. "My lady, I promise." Gendry sounded flustered, a condition Ned had encountered several times, usually when his young squire had been talking to his daughters, particularly Arya. "The answers to your questions are just within this chamber." He didn't catch Caitlyn's reply, but the tone suggested his wife was angry and insulted. The door suddenly shook with Gendry's loud knocks. The boy really needs to learn his own strength. "Come in," Ned ordered, taking a deep breath to steady himself. The chamber door swung open. Gendry stepped back and held the door, allowing Catelyn Stark to enter the room. The woman stalked in, her head high, her eyes blazing. Her gaze flit around the room and came to rest on him. She stopped short, so short in fact that Gendry was unable to close the door behind her without striking her in the back. He paused, uncertain what to do. He looked towards his master for guidance, but Ned wasn't looking at him now. His eyes were totally focused on his wife. "Hello, Cat." It was the only greeting he could think of. His throat was dry, parched even. A sudden occurrence that had only struck him a second before the door opened. Catelyn blinked once, twice. "Ned." She breathed, doubt and amazement filling the single word. He stepped forward. "It's me, Cat." His eyes took her in, drinking in the sight as a thirsty man does a goblet of cool water. "Gods, she is even more beautiful than the last time I saw her. Even more beautiful than our wedding day, though that was 20 years and 5 children ago." His wife looked at him as if he was an apparition, some ghost brought back from the dead. Her mind seemed to have problems accepting what she was seeing. Slowly, though, ever so slowly, her mouth widened into a broad smile. Within seconds she raced forward and threw herself into his arms. Ned caught her halfway across the room. They hugged each other tightly as if fearing to let go. He faintly heard the chamber door shut softly behind him. A vague part of his brain appreciated that Gendry must have been relieved to have had the chance to excuse himself. He breathed in his wife's hair, smelled her scent. It was as sweet and comforting as it had been many months ago when they'd last seen each other in King's Landing. "It's really you," Catelyn muttered, more to herself than to him. She squeezed him tight as if he might disappear at any moment. "It's really me," Ned confirmed, returning her hug and kissing the side of her head, an action he hadn't done since their last meeting. Catelyn pulled back and looked at him, taking in his neat beard and long hair. "I always dreamed you were alive, but I'd..." Her expression was crestfallen, guilty even. He understood. "You thought I was dead." Catelyn nodded, tears streaming down her cheeks, though whether from happiness or sadness, Ned couldn't say. "It's been so long since we've had word." "I know, my love," Ned said with a sad smile. "So much has happened. So much has changed." His wife looked quizzically at him as the shock of him being before her abated. "Where have you been?" The question was full of suspicion and anger. "Why couldn't you not get here sooner? Or at least send word?" Ned didn't want to get into this now. He'd planned to tell the tale later when the family had gathered, but Catelyn's face was set. She was determined to extract answers. His mind raced to determine what he should tell her. As if on cue there was another knock on the door, a much gentler, subtler sound than the one heralding Gendry's arrival earlier. Ned let forth a sigh. He broke eye contact with Catelyn as he looked over his shoulder. "Come in." The door opened quietly. Ned looked at his wife, who was staring at him intently, paying no mind to the door behind her. He indicated with his head that she should turn her attention to the door. Reluctantly, Catelyn turned, drawing her eyes away from Ned and focusing on the open entrance. Only to catch sight of Sansa and Arya stood in the entranceway. The three women stared at each other, taking in the sight. Ned was close enough to Catelyn to hear her sharp intake of breath as she saw her daughters, alive and healthy, as they stood nervously looking at her. There was a moment's pause and then Arya bounded across the room, much as Catelyn had only minutes before. She threw herself around her mother and drew her into a tight embrace. Sansa was only an instant behind, coming in to hug her mother, who, without words, extended both arms around her two daughters and pulled them in close. Catelyn's mouth worked soundlessly as she held her girls, tears of joy streaming down her face and mixing with the tears coming from her daughter's own eyes. Smiling, Ned stepped up behind the group and pulled them towards him, enveloping his family in a warm loving hug. "It begins many months ago in the black cells of King's Landing." Ned stood at the head of the table. Next to him was Catelyn, who was sat in close to Sansa and Arya. The three looked happy and had spent the afternoon catching up on the events of the last few months. He doubted that the girls had been out of Catelyn's sight during the course of the afternoon. Her expression was intent and she held Sansa and Arya's hands with her left while her right grasped Ned's own as it rested on the long council table. Next to them sat the Blackfish who had struggled down to the chambers using a stout wooden pole as a cane to help him move her. The knight had sworn as he'd wriggled into his chair and had looked relieved when he was finally down and wasn't facing the prospect of moving for quite some time. Then there was Lewin. The Grand Maester had queried whether his presence was necessary, given that he was not a member of the family. "You're close enough for me," Ned had replied. That had been enough. Lewin had acquiesced with a tear in his eye. At Lewin's left hand, and at the opposite end of the table to Ned sat Robb. The king had been up and about for the last few hours and he had been able to get to the council chamber more or less unaided, though Margaery was constantly at hand offering him assistance should he require it. On this occasion he had not. Stiffly, Robb had entered the room and helped his pregnant wife to a seat to his left before he assumed his own chair. The only signs of the injuries he had recently endured were the bruises and scars on his face and the grimace he gave when he sat into his chair. The queen looked beautiful in a simple dress of silken green. She wore her hair loose and it tumbled about her shoulders. There was no jewelry but her skin was so clear, her countenance so rosy that the queen looked radiant regardless. Next to her was Olenna Tyrell. The infamous Queen of Thorns had hobbled into the room on a stout cane. She looked briefly at Ned, nodding slightly as she took her seat. She settled in comfortably, setting her cane to rest somewhere under the table and proceeded to fold her hands in her lap. She looked intently around the room but then resting her gaze on Ned himself. He felt the penetrating eyes upon him. The old woman had spent the time since her arrival with Margaery. The two had occupied the time looking after Gullen who still lay almost comatose in his own chamber. No doubt the queen had ample time to update her grandmother on my return to the fold. Finally, sat next to Lady Olenna, was a stranger to most of the group. Sir Morton Waynwood sat in full armor in the chair to Ned's right. The heir to Iron Oaks radiated nothing but his own formidable will and yet, beneath the gruff exterior, was kindness and warmth, provided you knew how to look. Ned had asked the redoubtable knight be there so as to fill in any gaps in the narrative he was trying to impart to the others. In Yohn Royce's absence, Sir Morton was the best that Ned could hope for. The man looked uncomfortable to be at a family gathering but he had dutifully taken his place, though Ned had seen the knight and Catelyn share a familiar smile as he entered. They probably met during Kat's recent visit to the Eyrie. Ned took a deep breath and then went on. "I was sitting in one of the cells awaiting my fate. Bemoaning my choices and cursing the fact that I'd trusted Petyr Baelish to help me thwart the Lannisters." He saw Catelyn stir, her mouth opened to say something but he shot her a look to stay her. "There will be time enough for questions later. I was held there for a while, day and night have no meaning in that dark place so I lost count of how long I was imprisoned. Aside from the odd jailer and the rats and I had no company." He glanced around the room, none save Lord Varys. There was a ripple round the room but no one interrupted. "It was Varys," Ned continued, "who informed me of the state of the Seven Kingdoms. Of how Stannis and Renly were looking to rise in revolt. How Robb," he nodded to the far end of the table, "had called the northern banners and was marching on the south. I confess I thought that the Lannisters' days were numbered, although I was certain that Lord Tywine would make a fight of it. It seemed that the Stormlands, Vale, Riverlands and North were all rising against the Iron Throne. The Lannisters would be overwhelmed by sheer numbers." Ned paused. "This was small comfort in my cell however. I didn't care for myself but the fact that Cersei had managed to capture Sansa gave me pause." He looked up to his auburn-haired daughter who looked at him distressed. "I confess the idea of my eldest daughter in the hands of the Queen gave me a great many sleepless nights and many restless days." Ned twisted his head slightly to take in Arya who sat in a rough leather tunic and leggings, the very opposite of her sister. The girl smiled bravely at him. Of Arya of course no trace could be found. Even by the Eunuch's spies. He sighed. It was a difficult time. Nothing to do but lament over the death of the king and my own stupidity of trusting the wrong people. However, after a while, Varys visited me to propose an accord. If I confessed my treason and took the black then Sansa would be returned to Robb, who would be allowed to maintain his position as the new Warden of the North. Ned's eyes hardened, providing he swore loyalty to the new king of course. Ned looked at Robb who was sat, straight-backed, into his heavy wooden chair. His son's mouth and eyes were set and cold. Ned doubted there would ever have been peace with him. My stomach turned at the offer, but I felt I had no choice. What they wanted me to swear was nothing but lies, but I found Ned looked again at Sangza, that I would do anything to save Sangza from harm. A single tear rolled down Sangza's cheek. She stifled a sob and looked tearfully at her father. His heart ached for her. It was not your fault. You saw things through a child's eyes. You thought only that I was denying you what you wanted, your golden prince, without realizing the deadly game going on all around you. However, Ned went on, the eunuch negotiations were all in vain. The night before I was due to make my confession, men arrived in my cell and abducted me. There was surprise from everyone around the table. Even Sir Morton looked shocked. 2 men arrived, Ned said. I had no idea who they were or what they wanted. I was so weak that I couldn't resist as they manhandled me out of my cell and took me to a nearby chamber on the grounds level of the Red Keep. He smiled. My meager attempts at fighting back was quickly responded to with a swift blow to the head. After that I knew nothing of how I was extracted from the keep and spirited away from the capital. Ned looked at Sir Morton, but the knight said nothing. He doesn't know either. I didn't expect he would. I awoke, he continued, in a room I didn't know with a maester tending my leg. I was no longer a captive but for my broken body. My leg, already badly injured as a result of my fight with Jaime Lannister in the streets of King's Landing, had become badly infected during my stay in the squalid conditions of the Black Cells. The maester, a man who wouldn't even tell me his name, did his best to care for me without saying where I was and who he served. He paused, remembering. I would have gone mad in that room were it not first the maester and then my 2 girls who cared for me night and day. Ned gave his daughters a smile. They saw me through the long feverish nights and horrendous days, where I knew nothing but pain and delirium. Kat gave each girl's hand a squeeze. Sansa gave her a grateful look while Arya just looked uncomfortable. He went on. I was visited a day or 2 later by Sir Andor Royce. He informed me that I was in Runestone, a castle I had visited during my fostering at the Eyrie but not one that I was familiar with. The man informed me that I had been sent here, by persons unknown, my arrival preceded by a letter informing House Royce that I would soon be delivered to the docks on a simple merchant ship. They found me unconscious in a crate in the hold of the ship. 7 hells. Brynden muttered, you mean to tell us that the Lords of the Vale didn't help you make your initial escape? You were just shipped to them like a sack of grain. Exactly that, Ned agreed. It was like something out of farce. Andor and his men had to break open several containers before they found me. The smell of me lying in my own excrement was said to be overpowering. Once I was found, they paid off the merchant, who incidentally had no idea that I was on board, and taken back to the keep on the back of a cattle cart. Why the secrecy? Robb asked from his seat. Once you were free of the Lannisters' clutches, surely that could declare that they had you. Ned gave a sigh. Andor knew that Lysa had refused to declare for either side. In fact, that was why his father, Lord Yone, was away. He was at the Eyrie making the case for war and for an alliance with our forces. Declaring that they had me would be akin to declaring war on the Iron Throne, and that was not something Andor felt he could do by himself, no matter how much he wanted to. He decided to have me brought to his family's home and attended by their resident healer, Maester Helyweg. A good man, if not a touch reserved. I had a devil of a time trying to extract information from him. Andor meant well, but he played it very safe. He waited for his father to return from the Eyrie to determine their next course. He feared that if Lysa found out my location, she'd take me captive so that she could use me as a hostage against both sides. Such an action would plunge the Vale into civil war. Ned smiled at Morton Waynwood. Still, when Lord Yone returned, it wasn't only his son and heir who had a surprise. He had a shock of his own. He chuckled. It transpires that whoever rescued me from the Black Cells also effected the rescue of Sansa and Arya. They traveled with a retainer on another merchant ship and had made their way to Iron Oaks. The room turned its eyes to Sansa and Arya. I was in a room in Maegor's Holdfast. Sansa said, reddening in shame, I had been locked up there since I had told the Queen about Father wanting to send us home. There was a ripple round the table. Tears cascaded down Sansa's cheeks. I didn't mean it. The girl cried. I didn't know that's what she'd do. The Queen had always been so nice to me, so sweet and courteous. The disbelief from around the room was palpable. Caitlin had released Arya's hand and was soothing the girl, mumbling softly as she hugged the girl who had begun to sob hysterically. "It was all my fault," Sansa wailed, "but I didn't know. I swear it. I never dreamed they would kill everyone and imprison Father." "Sansa!" Ned called sternly. The girl stopped her crying and looked at him. He gave a small smile. "We have discussed this many times. It was not your fault. It was the Queen who ordered the deaths of our men. All you did was confide in someone you trusted." He couldn't fail to notice that Arya was giving her sister the usual look of disdain. Inwardly, Ned seethed. They cannot seem to find some common ground, they are as unalike as fire and water. He had tried many times to talk this through with both of them. Sansa knew she had done a foolish thing and she deeply regretted it now. Still, Arya had nothing but contempt for her sister. Believing that she was an empty-headed girl who had betrayed the family and left them vulnerable to their enemies. Ned despaired. Maybe Caitlin will have more luck with them than I. Sansa at least seems to have grown during her time with Lady Waynwood. Not so long ago she had refused to accept that her actions had led to Cersei being pre-warned about my own intentions. He considered. Though that's unfair. I gave plenty of warning of that all on my own. I stood in the gardens and told her to flee. Maybe foolishness runs in the family. Ned decided not to make her carry on her tale. "Arya," he said, looking at his youngest daughter, "why don't you carry on your part of the story?" Arya nodded and then spoke. "Our home was attacked, there were bodies everywhere." Caitlin gasped, her face white, but Arya pressed on regardless. "When the Queen's men came I ran out onto the streets. Though I didn't know where to go or what to do." Her eyes blazed. "I was hunted, scared. The Queen had men scouring the city. They were at the city gates, the docks, everywhere. I couldn't escape. For the first few days I was hungry and tired. I had to catch rats and pigeons to trade for food. I sleep in doorways. It was horrible, but I was alive." Arya paused, her thoughts elsewhere. Caitlin, with tears in her eyes, shook her head in anguish. Seeing her mother upset made Arya steel herself and she continued. "Eventually Syrio found me wandering the streets." "Syrio?" Caitlin asked. "Syrio Floral," Ned offered. "I had employed him as Arya's dancing master. He was thought killed in the attack on the Tower of the Hand, though the way the man tells it, he was injured and saved from death by a number of Silent Sisters. He survived the attack on our men," Robb said. Arya looked at him fiercely. "Syrio is the finest swordsman the world has ever seen. He fought Meryn Trant of the Kingsguard even though he was only armed with a training stick. He was terribly injured but was left alive as Trant raced to find me. He escaped the tower and got to the streets. The Silent Sisters found him and healed him." "Swordsman?" Caitlin said. "I thought you said he was her dancing master." "Bravo Seawater Dancing," Brynden Tully said. "He's a sword master." Ned merely nodded, avoiding his wife's querying eye at this development. "If she thinks that's bad, just wait till she finds out what Arya was up to at Runestone." "How did he know to find you?" Margaery asked quietly. The girl was searching Arya's face. "He can't have searched the city, it would have taken too long." Ned's youngest daughter looked her new good sister up and down, dismissing the Queen with the same look she usually reserved for Sansa. "Syrio says that he was visited in the healing house by some cloaked man. He was told where to find me, what he should do, and provided money for the purpose. As soon as he was well enough he left the healing house and went in search of me. Because I had engaged Syrio's services and Arya was his student, the man felt he had an obligation to see her safe." Ned explained. Arya smiled. He'd shaved the curly hair off his head. "I hardly recognized him. He took care of me. We went through the city and back to the docks. He gave a merchant money to have us as passengers." The girl indicated her sister. "We met Sansa on board." "How did she get there?" Robb asked. Everyone turned to look at Sansa. With so much attention Ned feared she'd begin to cry again. "I was locked in my room," Sansa said quietly. "I was alone, they'd taken Jane Poole away. I cried and cried. But then one night, a man came to my room. He was a thin man, cloaked and hooded. He said he had come to take me to safety and that he was a friend of my father's. Robb and Caitlin looked at Ned. All he could do was shake his head to indicate that he had known nothing about this at the time. I was being kept as guest of the Queen in the Black Cells. He took me through the city, Sansa went on. I rode on his cart. It was the middle of the night, and very cold, but he covered me with blankets. We got the docks and he introduced me to Gendry. Gendry? Caitlin asked sharply. Ned answered. Gendry was a blacksmith who worked on the Street of Steel who I met whilst I was carrying out my duties as Hand of the King. He was to have joined the Night's Watch, but Yoren, the Watch's recruiter in the capital, dropped him off at the boat when he'd heard I'd been arrested. Gendry doesn't know why. Arya spoke, anxious that the muscular squire not be implicated in any plots. He was just left on the boat and told to wait for Syrio. So was I. Sansa added. Ned took up the narration. The ship that Syrio had bartered passage on left King's Landing that night and made for the eastern coast of the Vale. The ship had been bound to Runestone, but bad weather blew them off course, and Syrio tells me that the captain had no choice but to dock more inland, near Iron Oaks. Syrio determined to take the girls there before heading to Runestone. Arya and Sansa nodded in agreement. As luck would have it, they arrived at more or less the same time as Lord Royce as he travelled with Lady Waynwood back from the Eyrie. I knew Lord Royce. Sansa said firmly. He had come to Winterfell when his son was heading north to the Night's Watch. I spoke to him about it and convinced him of who we were. That was fortunate, Ned confirmed. Sansa was able to confirm the group's identity to Lord Royce and Lady Waynwood. When Syrian told Lord Royce that he had been headed to Runestone, Yoren decided to take the group there. As far away from Lysa as possible. He chuckled. You can imagine the scene in the courtyard of Runestone. There is Yoren telling his son he's picked up the Warden of the North's daughters on the road, and there is his son and heir telling him that the Warden himself is in an upstairs chamber. Ned's head twisted in regret. Unfortunately, I was too unwell to have a meaningful conversation with Yoren, but I was able to see Sansa and Arya. I can't tell you how relieved I was to see them safe and whole. I think I would know something about that, Caitlin said wryly. Ned nodded at her. Of course. What confuses me, Margaery interjected, is who arranged this. Who managed to spirit you all from the city without getting caught. It seems that not only did they do that, but they also sent messages letting us know they'd done it. He frowned. Messages. I received this, Caitlin said, extracting a piece of parchment from the folds of her dress. It told me that you had been freed, but gave no hint of your whereabouts. You were not alone. Olenna said, cocking her head. We received 2 letters in the Reach. The first said that Lord Eddard was free. The second came much later, giving details of the plot between the Lannisters, Boltons and Freys. Without a doubt that letter saved our lives. Robb said, anger in his eyes. The group paused as everyone looked at around the table. No one seemed to have answers. It would seem that we have a guardian of sorts. Ned said slowly, they have done us all a number of favors. He paused, thinking things through. In any event, it has not direct bearing on what happened in the Vale. He shared a glance with Sir Morton. The situation in the Vale was very precarious. Word of the war against the Lannisters had reached the Eyrie, that Robb was on the march and that he was asking for aid. The Lords of the Vale were determined to fight on our behalf. Caitlin nodded from her seat. Ned saw that her mouth had set in a grim line. Lysa Arryn denied every request for aid. Ned said bluntly, if he were with us, then Yoren could tell you of the numerous letters he sent to the Eyrie imploring Lysa to act on her family's behalf. My mother did much the same, Sir Morton added. Ned acknowledged the man's words with a brusque nod. She refused to countenance any action that would take her forces away from home. They were needed, she said, to defend her son and their liege lord. He didn't need to look at Sir Morton to know the man was glowering. Yoren refused to accept that, Ned said. With the Riverlands and North joined and Robb defeating Lord Tywine, it seemed that we were winning. We heard that Robb was declared king and meant to secede his region from the Iron Throne. Then we heard that Robb had married Margaery Tyrell and that the Reach had joined on our side. House Stark clearly had the advantage. Yoren again approached Lysa again about declaring for Robb. Again he was frustrated by failure. He kept on trying, but, unfortunately, events took a turn for the worse. The attack on the north. Caitlin said quietly. Indeed, Ned's face showed his anguish. Lysa used that as a reason not to declare for a side. If the Starks' home could be attacked, she argued, then why not the Vale once its defenders left? It was a specious argument to counter, clouded as it was by fear and paranoia. But then, Lysa has always been difficult. He sighed. I was a little better then, the fever had died down. Jon and I were able to plan in earnest. Our first thought was to smuggle our group out of the Vale through either the Bloody Gate or over the Fingers as I had done years before. The trip would be hard, especially in my condition, but I was willing to risk it. Unfortunately, Lysa seemed to sense our intentions. The Bloody Gate was sealed, border was blocked, and every road had soldiers loyal to the Uri on it. Even the small Vale fleet was used to watch the waters around the coast. There seemed to be no escape. Plus my capture would also imperil the House Royce as oath-breakers. We had to devise another plan. Ned took a breath. Jon began to write to his fellow lords, trying to win them to our cause. He dared not mention my presence by letter, but he informed trusted people like Lord Redfort and Lady Waynwood. Even so, steps were taken to hide us as much as possible. Sansa was sent to Iron Oaks to act as a handmaiden to Lady Waynwood. Arya was dressed as a boy and allowed to resume her training with Ciri O'Florel, who was added to the castle guard. She also joined Gendry in partaking in lessons conducted by Sir Samwell Stone, the Master-at-Arms at Runestone. He looked wistful. Even with our precautions, our situation was uncertain at best. Jon stepped up his efforts, but it seemed like he was stymied at every move. Lady Lysa issued an edict. Sir Morton grumbled, saying that lords were forbidden to converse with one another without her consent. She declared that traitors working for outside forces had infiltrated the Vale and were actively plotting against our young lord. The knight shifted in his seat. Loyalty and honor means everything to the Knight of the Vale. The idea of disobeying the Lady of the Uri, the wife of Jon Arryn, was something that many lords were deeply uncomfortable with. We were duty-bound to House Arryn, sworn to obey as our fathers had done before us. Not so Yohn Royce. Ned claimed, from the outset he was determined to find a way to change Lysa's mind. There just didn't seem to be a way to do it. He traveled back and forth from the Uri to try and seek an audience with Lysa, but was denied. Additionally, he began to see more and more of Petyr Baelish's cronies at the Uri. They always seemed to be around Lysa, whispering in her ear. Why would that be a problem? Kat asked weakly. Petyr is a friend. Ned's eyes flashed in anger. Not so. The man is a toady and an opportunist. It was he that turned on me and betrayed us to the Lannisters for personal gain. I trusted him, and loyal men, our men, paid the price. Caitlin blinked at him, her mouth open in shock. He moved on. We can discuss Littlefinger's crimes in earnest later. Jon and I tried to step up our efforts with the other lords, recruiting Lady Waynwood and Lord Redfort fully into our schemes, but we faced indecision on the parts of the other lords. Alone there was not much these three houses could do. He bowed his head. Then I relapsed. My leg festered and became worse, confining me to my chamber. Sansa returned from Iron Oaks to help look after me, and, with her and the Maester's care, I began to recover, though I spent weeks in bed flitting in and out of consciousness. I recovered, but we lost precious time and momentum. To make matter worse, we had a new enemy. Sir Morton leaned forward. While Lord Eddard healed, Petyr Baelish arrived in the Vale. Ostensibly he was here to negotiate with the widow Arryn to see if she would pledge her loyalty to the Iron Throne. The knight frowned. It was clear from the start that he had other plans in mind. The whoremonger was obviously intending to use his new position as the Lord of Harrenhal to marry Lysa Arryn, to assume control of the Vale. It wasn't long before the wedding was announced. To think, that bastard sitting in the high seat of the Arryns. Lysa always had affection for Petyr, the Blackfish noted. Ned saw Caitlin nod in agreement. Ned took up the tale. I awoke from my fever to find that Jon had left Runestone to journey to the Uri. He returned to relay news of the unhappy events. Baelish was now in control of the Uri and was manipulating Lysa to the extent that he was now truly the master of the region. The border guard was doubled. Spies were thought to be in every castle and keep. It was a difficult time. When we did receive news, it seemed to be of an ill nature. We heard of Hoster Tully's death, of the events at the Twins, of Ed Muir's murder. Ned looked sorrowfully at Caitlin. It must have been so hard for her. It was these events that forced me to move forward. I would sit on my hands no longer. Leg be damned. He smiled. Fortunately, the gods were with me. First my leg healed, the fever broke and I was able to move about unencumbered. I began to train with the castle guards in order that I might return to the field. It was then that I properly met Gendry and took him on as my squire. Second, Ned said, Littlefinger made an error. Lysa summoned the Lords of the Vale to the Eyrie to discuss the recent death of Lord Edmure and what it meant for Lysa. I felt uneasy, so I suggested that Lords Royce, Redfort and Lady Waynwood announced a certain route of travel and then go by alternative means, sending out decoys. This they did. Thank the gods, Sir Morton declared. The decoys were ambushed by tribesmen and slaughtered. While there was no proof of Littlefinger's involvement, Ned cut in. It seemed deeply convenient that the three nobles most opposed to his rule should suddenly be attacked on the way to a meeting with their liege. Lord Baelish must have been surprised when they arrived at the Eyrie safe and sound. Lewin supposed. He was surprised, Morton snapped, but the cunt hid it well. He promised to send our men to find the tribesmen responsible and to provide escorts for the return trip. My mother says he was most perturbed when they refused the offer. He asked them to pledge fealty to him as the new father of Lord Robin. Impudent bastard. They did so, but very grudgingly. The night went on. When that farce was done with, a general council was called. Baelish said that his wife's father and brother lay dead and that her family lands were imperiled. As far as everyone knew, the Stark line was almost at an end. Lord Eddard's children were dead or, in Rob's case, thought like to die. In that case Robin Arryn would become the true heir to Riverrun. Baelish asked us to enforce that claim, especially when Catelyn became the new liege of the Riverlands. Morton leaned forward, his face as angry. It was a farce. By rights Robb Stark was the heir, and he had not died. When he saw the Lord's unhappiness with this tale, Littlefinger changed direction. He said that the Lannisters were attempting to blackmail him. That they were threatening to spin a false tale about him betraying Lord Eddard in King's Landing. If this nefarious plan worked, he argued, the Riverlands, North and maybe even the Reach would be at war with us. Clever bastard. Brynden said softly. We were not asked to fight at this stage, Morton carried on, only be ready to fight any enemy that presented itself, while Littlefinger tried to work out a diplomatic solution. In the meantime he proposed to move an army to the Bloody Gate to deter our foes. The man's lip curled in distaste. Thankfully some of us in the room knew the truth. We knew from Lord Eddard that Littlefinger was indeed guilty of that which he accused the Lannisters of planning to malign him with. Morton smiled cruelly. However, it was my mother who saw an opportunity in what Baelish was saying. Lady Waynwood spoke up, Ned said, heartily supporting Littlefinger's motion, saying that the soldiers of Iron Oak stood ready to defend their liege. Jon and Redfort followed her lead and, before long, the other lords had pledged support to this force. We were all to march to the Bloody Gate, Morton claimed, with as many forces as we could gather. We duly made preparations. It was at this time that I received a final letter at Runestone. Ned said, pulling a letter from inside his tunic. It said that Lord Tywine intended to march from King's Landing and advance on Harrenhal, and that Littlefinger had pledged to support this by attacking our host from behind with the army of the Vale. Ned looked steadily between his wife and son. It was then that the time for discussion was over. We had to move to ensure that Baelish was no longer a player in this game. He needed to be deposed. Thankfully, thanks to Baelish's own plans, we now had the mechanism to do so, with the Lords of the Vale gathered in one place and assembling their own forces. How would that help? Catelyn asked. We used the troop movements as cover. Ned said. Baelish was keeping the lords with him at the Eyrie while messages were sent far and wide across the Vale ordering the forces to muster on the Bloody Gate. I knew that Littlefinger's spies would be kept very busy in watching these large groups of armed men as they marched across the land. I thought that they would miss a small party traveling in a circular route to the Eyrie as common tradesmen. I was right. I sent a coded message to Lord Royce and Lady Waynwood informing them of my intentions before I left Runestone with a small group. We travelled quickly and scaled the Eyrie using the same methods as I had when I was a boy. I know that fortress of old. Ned paused for a beat. I arrived at the High Hall in the middle of a war council meeting. Baelish's guards were no match for myself, Syrio and Gendry. We burst into the room and I declared who I was. It was a sight, let me tell you. Morton chuckled. I stood before them all, Ned thinking grimly on the memory, and declared Baelish a traitor, a false friend and a man of vaunting ambition. He shook his head. Littlefinger must have known the game was up, but he arrogantly ordered my arrest, quickly supported by Lysa. Order the arrest of Eddard Stark. Morton spluttered, rage coming off him in waves, in Jon Arryn's own hall. The very thing we'd all fought the Mad King for. We couldn't believe it. The lords turned on Baelish, Ned said. He was dragged from the dais and taken into custody. Thankfully Jon and Anya had made sure there were plenty of retainers on hand to arrest any loyalists he might have. Ned looked sorrowfully at Catelyn. What we hadn't anticipated was Lysa's response. Lady Lysa became hysterical, Morton confirmed. When Baelish was led away she started to rant and rave, screaming that we were all traitors, betraying her son and her husband's memory. She began to cry that she'd done so much to be with Petter and that no one was going to take him from her. In her ravings Ned cut in. It must be me. She said that she even removed Jon Arryn so that she could be with Baelish. There was silence around the room. No. Catelyn gasped, no. It can't be. Ned looked at Brynden, who appeared every day of his many years. The old knight looked tired and haggard beyond reckoning. Cat, he began, reaching for her. No. Cat said, pulling away from her uncle. No. Lysa would never harm her husband. Never. She wouldn't, couldn't have done that. Ned could only stare mournfully at her. My foster father murdered by my wife's sister. All for a man who wanted a throne. Cat was shaking her head, looking eerily like Lysa when she realized that Baelish was going to be taken from her. Cat, Ned said softly. It was her own words. No one made her confess. She offered it up freely. To be honest though, it was the shock of her words that almost cost Lady Lysa her own life, Morton said. Indeed. At everyone's questioning gaze Ned spoke. You must understand, Lysa was distraught. More so than I ever thought possible. While she screamed we kept our distance, but then, without warning, she picked up her son from the high seat and attempted to throw both of them from one of the windows behind the dais. Gods be good, Lord Eddard got there in time. Morton said, looking admiringly at Ned. He glanced down at the wooden table, his cheeks reddening. I was lucky to have got there. I was moving towards her before she made her mad rush. If Robin had been lighter or Lysa stronger I would never have made it. Ned looked up again. Lysa lives, Cat. We took her into custody and she's now under house arrest at Iron Oaks. It is too risky to have her at the Eyrie. The servants and Arryn loyalists want her blood. I don't blame them. Tully grumbled. You're sure of this, Ned? I am. Ned stated firmly. Lysa has described the poison and said that Baelish procured it for her. Though he has, of course, denied all of this. Apparently she was upset that Jon planned to send his son to foster on Dragonstone with Stannis Baratheon. From my own investigations I believe that Jon had determined that Cersei's children were not Robert's and he intended to alert the king to his suspicions. He wanted his own son and heir out of harm's way. And for that she killed him. Catelyn said disbelievingly. Brynden said, you forget, Cat, I've been with Lysa these last few years. She is obsessed with her son. Has mothered him to excess. The thought she could lose him must have unhinged her. How is Robin now? Robb asked quietly. Ned closed his eyes. He took a deep breath. I regret to inform you all that Robin Arryn suffered a massive seizure, no doubt a result of his mother's attempt to kill him. The boy is comatose and the Maesters do not expect him to recover. Silence gripped the room. Catelyn stifled a sob. She looked sad beyond the telling. Ned gave them a moment and then spoke. As I say, Lysa and her husband are currently at Iron Oaks. I hear that Lysa became almost catatonic on the journey. She says and acknowledges nothing. Baelish has been thrown in the cells. Robin remains at the Eyrie as befits the Lord of the Vale. With Aunt Lysa deposed and so many nobles here with you, who is in charge? Robb asked. The lords formed a council and agreed that, for the moment, Lady Waynwood, Lord Belmer and Lord Hunter will have custody of the Vale until Robin Arryn recovers. If he recovers. When he does so they will act as regents to safeguard his interest. And if he doesn't? Rob looked sadly at his mother and great-uncle. I'm sorry to ask, but if you say there is little chance my cousin may get better. It was Sir Morton who answered, should he die then Harold Hardang becomes the new lord of the Uri. Who? Caitlin looked confused. John Arryn's sister's grandson. The Blackfish said. I've met him a few times. He's an impetuous youth but he has potential. Hard to argue with that. That being said, Ned cut in, there is hope that Robin could recover. He paused. The only thing left to my story is to say that we heard that Rob and Lord Tywine were maneuvering for battle near Harrenhal. The council agreed that Lysa Arryn proclamation of neutrality should be set aside and that the Vale should declare for the Starks. With a few of the lords, I raced at once for the Bloody Gate, took command of the army there, and advanced on the field. It was Lady Waynwood's idea to send messages ahead to Lord Tywine bearing Baelish's seal and saying that the plan was still in place and that all was well. Ned regarded Rob. The rest you know. We marched on Harrenhal and arrived in time to attack the Lannisters. He looked around the room. The question remains, what happens now? First things first. Ned said, looking down at the letter on the table. Are we all sure that we have no idea who our mysterious benefactor in King's Landing is? Everyone shook their heads. Ned cursed inwardly. The letter I received was unsigned. Olenna Tyrell said, save for some nonsense about the person serving the true ruler of Westeros. There were rumbles of confirmation from others at the table. Ned looked at his own letter. It was signed in the same way. True ruler. Who the hell can that be? Very well, Ned said grudgingly, this is a mystery that will have to wait. The fact is that whoever it is, they clearly seem to have our best interests at heart. I'm sure the person or persons will reveal themselves when they want to be known. His statement got a chorus of agreement. Right, well then this part of the meeting is over. On to the more difficult bit. This looks to be a good place to adjourn until tomorrow. I thank you all for coming. He smiled at them all warmly. If I could speak to my wife and son alone please. Taking their cue, Brynden Tully, Morton Waynwood and Maester Lewin got up from their seats and made for the door, the swift tap-tapping of Tully's cane and the jangle of the Maester's chains the only sound as they left the room. Ned turned to his daughters who had stubbornly refused to leave their chairs. Go on girls, we'll see you at dinner. Reluctantly the girls got up from their chair and exited the room. He turned his head to see Margaery and Olenna Tyrell still in their places. He stared at the old woman who did nothing more than stare back as if pleasantly bemused. This discussion is not for you, my lady. Olenna eyed him slyly. Unless I am mistaken, my lord, you intend to discuss who is in charge around here. That being the case, then this is very much a discussion I should be a part of. He tried again. This is a discussion for family, my lady. Olenna smiled. Haven't you heard Lord Stark? We're all one big family now. Ned sighed. Be that as it may. I need to discuss things with my son. Your son is the king. That makes such discussions a public matter. Ned opened his mouth but the Queen of Thorns cut over him. Let's not be coy, my lord. The subject for discussion here is one that will affect the entire realm. It will directly impact my house. Do you wish to insult me by pretending otherwise? As in, will my granddaughter still be queen come morning? He looked at her. Not at all, my lady. But this is a discussion between father and son. Not king and vassal. But he is your king. Olenna pressed. He has been declared by the North, Riverlands, Reach and now the Vale. Do you mean to take it from him? I dare say my family would have something to say about that. No doubt, Ned smiled, but then I was given to understand that Rob and Margaery married for love, not as the means to secure the Reach's forces. He eyed the woman coldly, saw the woman flinch ever so slightly. I was swayed by their tale of love. Do you mean to insult my family by saying that is not the case? That they married for some other reason? Olenna paused and looked at him. She smiled. Not at all, Lord Eddard. Not at all. Grandmother, please leave us, Margaery said, reaching over and clasping Olenna's hand. Lord Eddard merely wants to talk to his son. There is nothing wrong with that. The two Tyrell women looked at each other for a moment. Then, with a shrug of indifference, Olenna stood from her chair and walked out of the room. She turned at the doorway to look at Eddard. She smiled once more. It's a rare enough thing to meet a man who lives up to his reputation. Then there were the four of them. Ned would have preferred that Margaery left, but his good daughter had entwined her hands with Rob's and was now returning his gaze with a stubborn expression on her face. Very well then. Robb, No, father, his son spoke, let me go first. I want to apologize. Apologize? Ned was surprised. Apologize for what? Robb seemed to gather himself. I had no idea you were alive. He seemed sad. We hoped, of course, especially when that letter arrived, but when you didn't appear we feared you lost. You and my sisters. Catelyn nodded, tearfully, agreeing with her son's words. I had already started this frightful war. Robb said, Riverrun was under attack and I could do nothing else but press on with fighting the Lannisters who, if they hadn't killed you directly, would have been responsible for your death. A war for me. I suppose there's a flattery in there somewhere. The war took on a life of its own. Robb said. Before I knew it we had the Lannisters on the run, we had invaded the Westerlands. Renly was dead and Stannis had been defeated on the Blackwater. His son looked at Margaery before returning his gaze to Ned's. I never asked to be king. The men hailed me as their leader when they thought you were dead. The Great Jon felt I was the man to take up your mantle. The Great Jon, Galbart Glover, Ricard Karstark, all my old friends are gone. You had to do it, Robb, Catelyn said quietly. I myself advised you to do so. Robb took a deep breath. Nevertheless, I could have refused the burden the lords placed upon me. I stepped up and took the crown in the hope that I could make you proud. I have done my best to live by the lessons you taught me. He paused to gulp nervously. However, I swear to you I never meant to usurp what is rightfully yours. As far as I am concerned, you are Lord of Winterfell and Warden of the North. Absent your death or abdicating, those titles remain yours. Ned bowed his head. That must have been hard to say. Robb, No, father, please let me finish. Robb said firmly, his eyes clear. I should not be king, not while you live. Margaery looked beseechingly at her husband. Robb, please think about. No. His son said, practically shouting. He shook his head as he looked at Ned. The last thing I would ever do is insult you. Robb, you haven't insulted me. Ned sat in his chair. He looked at his son. I am proud of you. Fiercely proud. Really? Robb looked at him. I swear. Ned confirmed. Every father wonders if he'll be humbled by the feats of his son. In my case, I know I have been. When I fought against the Mad King, I had Robert and Jon Arryn with me and later Hoster Tully. You had no one, and yet look what you've done. Over half the realm has declared for you. Robb sighed. It's not been easy. Being a leader should never be easy. Ned stated, leadership is not a luxury to be enjoyed, it is a burden to endure. But now that you are back, Catelyn said, what is to be done? There can't be two leaders of the army. Ned stared at his son. For a long moment they merely looked at each other, communicating silently. After a while he spoke, I do not approve of you being acclaimed king, Robb. Regardless of whether you have any right to it, I have seen what the throne does to people and I wouldn't wish it on you. That being said, I happen to believe, he went on, that Stannis is the rightful king of Westeros. He is Robert's brother and has a right to the throne. Even with the accusations that Brian has laid against him. Margaery argued, kinslaying. The burning of non-believers who refuse to follow his Lord of Light. I cannot speak to that. Ned replied, I only know that Stannis has the rightful claim to the Iron Throne. Margaery went white as she looked at her husband. Robb merely looked dazed and fatigued. Then he blinked and looked up at his father. The Iron Throne, he repeated, but not the North or our other territories. Ned hated this. Wordplay. Subtlety. It was all too much for a simple northern such as him. Nevertheless he spoke once again. Let us just say that we should keep our options open for the time being. He glanced out of a window to the side of the room. At present we have our enemies that we must deal with. The Lannisters at King's Landing and the Boltons in the north. Not to mention, he shot a glance at Margaery. The Ironborn who are attacking us in multiple locations. He paused, we deal with them, then we will sort through the complicated notions of who's king and what they are king of. Robb nodded in agreement. But Ned, Catelyn said. You cannot both lead. He saw Margaery nod. I concur. Ned said, looking again at his son. I suggest that you remain here and rest while I take your host south to King's Landing. It won't be long before we drive the Lannisters out. No, Robb said determinedly, I wish to go south. He looked at Margaery, who nodded slightly. Mace Tyrell is somewhere in the south, either killed or captured. I mean to take the capital and then march on to the Stormlands to force Stannis to return my good father, either as a captive or his bones. You feel able to deal with Stannis Baratheon yourself? Robb looked at his father, the steely eyes matching his own. You may disagree with me being king, father, but I am declared for by our lords. That is a role I mean to fulfill until either I give it up or death takes me. You taught me to fear no man. I did not fear Lord Tywine, I do not fear Stannis. And there it is. Ned glanced at Margaery, who had tears in her eyes. He nodded. Very well, we will divide our Vale forces between us and you lead the southern host, if you're up to it. I am, Robb said in a tone that left no room for doubt. Good lad. Ned felt his chest tighten with pride. Where will you go, Ned? Catelyn asked fearfully. Lord Tarly will continue to lead the assault on Casterly Rock and then on to the Iron Islands. Ned said, thinking aloud. The Blackfish will return to Riverrun to continue to hunt for Free and Bolton stragglers. Robb said. Ned inclined his head. Then there is only one place for me to go. I will head north with the remainder of our forces in the Riverlands and the Neck. I'll breach Moat Cailin and take back the north. It's time to deal with events in the north. He looked at his wife and son. You deal with the Lannisters and Stannis. Leave Roose Bolton to me. Chapter 50, Tyrion 9. Chapter text. He watched the sun from his window. The great ball of light sank below the far-off horizon and into the lands of the west. He estimated that there was merely an hour or two of daylight left. Then we must be off. He turned away from the window. Plenty of time to while away my precious hours after we're safely away from this wretched city. He looked around his chamber. It seemed depressingly full and yet empty at the same time. He had packed a few crucial belongings and keepsakes, but they had barely filled a small chest. He had had it smuggled to the boat with very little difficulty, wrapped as it was with laundry. The rest of the items in the room had little or no value to him. This was never my real home. Besides, I only moved into this room under sufferance of my loving family. If father had had his way, I would most likely have been kept in that grubby little room in the bowels of the keep. Though, he reflected, such a thing might have aided him now. It would have made his exit from the city less visible, and thus more likely to succeed. How had it come to this? Planning to leave the city in the dead of night. He didn't want to leave, he wasn't sure that his plan would work. Even though he had given it a lot of thought, planned the whole thing as meticulously as he was able, it still remained a highly dubious enterprise. The alternative, of course, would be to wait here. I don't know what the enemy has in mind for us, but it's safe to say that it's nothing good. The sounds of a scuffle drew his attention away from his chamber's decorations and towards the door. Someone was definitely heading his way. At a trice he was at his bedside, found his dagger in its hiding place and made his way to behind the chamber door. Maybe I can kill one of the bastards before they take me. Though why would they announce their presence by making so much noise? Do they really hold me in so little regard? Not for the first time he regretted his decision not to place some of his mountain clansmen as guards, but to do so may have alerted Varys and his allies that Tyrion feared danger from within the Red Keep. My cleverness may be the death of me. The door opened with a bang. He was almost flattened into the harsh red stone of the wall, but he managed to dive backwards. He came up again, dagger in front of him, ready to stab at a foe, before he saw the identifier of the interloper. Or rather, interlopers. Shagger, son of Dolph, had entered his room manhandling an errant beggar, a pitiful, wretched specimen of a man. They wrestled for a moment before Shagger struck the man about the face and threw him unceremoniously to the floor. You, stay there or Shagger will cut off your manhood and feed it to the goats. Tyrion sighed, this at least proved no danger. He left his dagger on a table and walked into the room, eager to appear calm and in control of himself. What is the meaning of this? The clansman turned to face him, looking down at him with narrow eyes. This one wanted to try to get into the big hall, half man. You ordered Shagger, son of Dolph, to bring any such men to you. I meant assassins, not beggars. Tyrion nodded thoughtfully as if scrutinizing the man's words. He looked down at the beggar. And what business would a lowly beggar have in the great hall, I wonder? The figure on the floor reared up and glared at him through a bloody nose and a swelling eye. Watch your language, imp. Tyrion stared. Meryn Trant. Sir Meryn to you, imp. Tyrion's face hardened. A man on his knees should be more polite. The knight hawked and spat onto the stone floor. He wiped dirt and sweat from his face. I don't answer to you. The tone was surly. Ah, but you do, Tyrion said, raising his hand with an outstretched finger. Perhaps you forget, Sir Meryn, that you are under my command. By my father decree. To his surprise, Meryn started to laugh. The knight fell backwards onto his elbows as he laughed hysterically. Tyrion froze. He cursed his own stupidity. He had been so preoccupied with seeing the dejected knight humbled before him that he had forgotten to ask the most important question. Last time I saw this man he was heading north with the army, bound for Harrenhal. How is that he is here wearing clothes that even a beggar would be ashamed of? Shagger, wait outside. The savage looked at him. You want to talk to this one half man? Not particularly, but I'll talk to him all the same. Yes, please, wait outside. I'll call if I need you. With a shrug, Shagger walked outside and closed the chamber door with a thud. Tyrion walked to his writing desk and made ready some wine for him and his guest. He paused to think as the thick red liquid poured into the heavyset goblets. There's only 3 reasons Trant could be here in this way and so attired. He's a messenger from father traveling on some secret mission. He's a deserter, which would be ludicrous given that he's smuggled himself into one place that would likely kill him for such an action. Or, well, the last option was too terrible to contemplate. Tyrion turned to see Trant pull himself off the floor and settle himself in a chair opposite Tyrion's own. He handed the man the goblet, who took it without a word of thanks and quickly swallowed half the contents in one gulp. This does not augur well. Tyrion walked slowly around the table and sat in his chair. He stared at the bedraggled man, now with the desk between them. Neither of them spoke for a while. Why are you here, Sir Meryn? Tyrion asked. No other place I could go, Meryn said, snorting. The capital is the only place I know I'll be safe. Well, safety is a relative concept. Safe from what? Tyrion inquired softly. The knight stared at him as if he was mad. His face reddened. Safe from the fucking enemy. That's who. Tyrion held up a hand to stop him. Let's start from the beginning. You were with my father's host, bound for Harrenhal. Sir Meryn sighed heavily as he sat back in his chair. The army was utterly defeated. Your father's host lies rotting in the field, just east of that ruin of a castle. The shock hit Tyrion as if he'd been submerged in icy water. Even thought he had suspected this course of events, the impact was no less keen. Turns out ignorance is bliss. Tell me what happened, Tyrion ordered. He settled himself back in his chair. Trant reached forward to help himself to more wine. Tyrion did nothing to stop him as the man poured another full goblet. Anything to get the necessary information from this ingrate. We fought a battle just south of Harrenhal, Sir Meryn said, just off the King's Road. This I know. Tyrion said flatly. The other man looked at him dead-eyed. We fought the Stark Whelp. A massive pitched battle. Never seen the like. Thousands upon thousands of men. Looks as if father was wrong about Robb Stark. The boy was able to gather a sufficient force in time. Your father's plan was brilliant, Meryn declared, but he was betrayed. Tyrion felt his heart sink, but he still felt obliged to ask. Betrayed? Trant said, taking another long swallow of his wine. First the sellsword scum you'd paid for turned tail and ran at the first sign of danger. Then that fucker Baelish arrived and hammered our forces at the side and center at the same time. We never stood a chance. Peasant soldiers ran like their asses were on fire. To be clear, Tyrion said, very slowly, the Golden Company ran from the battle, and the forces of the Vale joined the fight on the Stark side. With equal slowness, as if enjoying the tension his delay was causing, Trant nodded, yes. Fuck. That one simple confirmation had confirmed all of Tyrion's worst fears. Where are my father and brother? No idea, Trant said, finishing off his wine. I didn't see them fleeing with the rest. He leaned forward to pour another goblet. Tyrion got there first, reaching over and drawing the pitcher out of reach. Did my father manage to extricate any of his army? Tyrion asked practically. I fucking doubt it. Trant scoffed. Not only did the bastards completely rout us, but they then pursued our fleeing army, cutting down men and taking prisoners. I got to Antlers by dusk but had to keep going as a northern army turned up. Tyrion blinked. Antlers has fallen. Trant nodded. With the rabble that Buckwell has assembled, there's no way he would have been able to hold the keep. Half his men were wounded. I thought it best not to hang around and wait to get captured. Tyrion sat back in his chair, pondering. So, to summarize. 2 allies have betrayed us. The army was routed. The whereabouts of its commanders, which include my brother and father, are currently unknown, and the enemy has crossed into the Crown lands. That's about the size of it, the knight said. He eyed the wine pitcher with longing. Tyrion disliked the man's flippancy. How is it that you're alive? You'd bloody Kingsguard. You're supposed to be one of the best knights in the realm. One of Joffrey's own 7. How is that the army is destroyed but you managed to survive? Meryn's eyes blazed like fire, a sign of life in an otherwise dull and shabby exterior. I fought, dwarf. I fought all the way through the battle. Almost killed Robb Stark, I might add. It was only after I was injured that I fell back. I was about to return to the fray when the Vale host arrived and sundered our lines. Regardless, Tyrion said idly, his eyes locked on Trant's face, it would be expected that a Kingsguard would do his duty by his king. That he would die on the field rather than retreat in shame. My duty is to the king. Trant rasped. I had to withdraw. What possible service would be accomplished by being another dead man on the field? Only the service of honor. Something I suspect that you know very little about. Tyrion dismissed this thought. This wretch may prove useful, and I would be foolish to dismiss him now. That being said, something seems missing from this little story. Why then do you appear at our door unarmored? And like a beggar to boot? If you fought with honor and withdrew out of necessity, then why have you discarded your white cloak? The knight looked at him as if he had taken leave of his senses. I had no choice. I rode all the way back to the city. Risked death and torture at every turn to bring news to the king and return to his service, only to discover, when I arrived, that the Golden Company have got here first. The sellswords are not likely to be predisposed to one who knows of their treachery. He has a point. So you sneaked into the city? He prompted. Trant said, wiping his mouth with the back of his hand. When I saw the Golden Company camped outside the city walls, I wasn't sure who I could trust. I worked my way round the city walls. I ditched my clothes and stole these rags from a fisherman on the banks of Blackwater Bay. I got through the Iron Gate and made my way here. Fear started to work up Tyrion's spine. How did you manage to gain access to the Red Keep? The other man snorted with disdain. That part was easy. I revealed myself to a few gold cloaks at a postern gate in the north wall of the keep. They admitted me. I was trying to find my way into the Great Hall, but I was accosted by your savage clansmen and hauled here. No. Did anyone see you? Tyrion got off his chair, and stalked around the table. A great number, I suppose, Trant replied, shrugging. I did not appreciate your man's behavior. 7 hells. Tyrion reached the taller man's side. Right, you've landed us in a right mess, Trant. He ignored the glare the other man gave him. I thought we had a little time. But now that's gone. Sir Meryn stared at him. What do you mean, imp? Tyrion reached over and rang a bell on his desk. He looked back. I have reason to believe that Varys has turned traitor. Your little story confirms it. If you had made a discreet entrance, then we might have been able to hide your presence from him. Now though, he should know imminently that you're back, if he doesn't know already. Trant looked thoroughly confused. I don't understand. Well, that's honest. Tyrion looked at him as the door to his chamber opened and Podrick Payne stepped in. I haven't the time or inclination to explain things to you now, Sir Meryn. Podrick here will smuggle you through the back corridors to the White Tower. You are to dress yourself in your usual Kingsguard armor and then report immediately to the king. Remember to wear your goddamned helm so you're not recognized. You are not to leave his side. I will call upon you before long. What are we going to do about the Golden Company? Trant asked as he slowly got up from his seat. I'll think of something, Tyrion said, ushering the knight from the room through a side door and motioning Podrick over to him. He lowered his voice to speak to his young squire, take Sir Meryn to the White Tower. Then return to me as quickly as you can. Bring Bronn with you. Yes, my lord. Podrick said, wide-eyed. Without another word he stepped after Meryn Trant. Tyrion turned around and quickly surveyed the room. Well, it looks as if I'll be leaving this place sooner than I had thought. The sun had set on the city. Darkness seemed to pervade every corner of the Godswood where Tyrion waited. Ordinarily he reveled in deeds taking place at night time. I do some of my best work in the dark. Now though it seemed even more ominous. The tress leaned in about him, every rustling bush or creaking branch heralded danger. If he looked into the darkness he was sure he could make out figures waiting for him, the gloom, ready to rise up and strike him down. Not for the first time that night, Tyrion shivered, though at any other time the climate would have been regarded as pleasantly warm. He wanted to pace and order Bronn to light a torch so that they could see better, that they could ward off the darkness all around them. But Tyrion knew it was too dangerous to do either of those things at this hour. No one would have been visiting the woods at this time. Their safety relied on secrecy. Beside it would need more than a torch to dispel this particular darkness and cold. He drew his cloak around him as he waited. Gods, it had felt like he'd been here for an age. He fidgeted restlessly, scratching phantom itches that seemed to plague his skin. His back hurt, the ever-present feeling of burning skin chafed against his tunic, exacerbated by the sweat trickling down from his neck and moistening the clothing beneath. He reached his arm behind him to scratch a particularly virulent itch on the back of his neck when a voice gave him pause. Would you give it a rest? Tyrion could barely make out the sellsword in the dim light, but he imagined the man standing next to him, sporting the same wry, dog grin he always seemed to have when danger lurked. What else am I supposed to do? He heard the sellsword shift slightly to the side. You're supposed to sit there and wait patiently. We're supposed to be in hiding, yet your fidgeting is alerting anyone in the vicinity that we're here. If we have enemies in the woods then we're dead anyway. Tyrion huffed. What was the point in us hiding at all then? Bronn sarcastically stated, smiling in the dark. Tyrion paused. Goddamn it. I'm slipping badly when even Bronn can outwit me. Still, I suppose I have the excuse that I have other, more important, things on my mind. He was about to offer his own wit and wisdom to proceedings when a small torchlight appeared at the entrance to the woods. Here we go, Bronn muttered. You can see them. Who it is, I mean? Tyrion asked, squinting to get a better sight. You think this woods is full of people just out for a stroll? Bronn snapped, it's them all right. Your squire moves with the grace of a stuck pig and your sister's tits can be seen from leagues away. Tyrion would ordinarily have said something back, but he had more pressing matters. Are they alone? Bronn looked left and right. As far as I can see. Damn. Tyrion said, she was supposed to bring the children. They're alone. Bronn said firmly. Fuck me, Tyrion cursed, even now she's playing games. He waited a moment for the two arrivals to step further into the woods before he emerged from his hiding place and walked quickly down the path towards the torchlight. He felt Bronn step in behind him as he scurried across the muddy grass. Podrick and Cersei saw him and stopped, waiting for him to come to them. Where are we here? Cersei had the same bored, impetuous tone that Tyrion had heard from his sister almost every day he'd seen her since she became queen. Since before that actually, now that I come to think about it. My sister has always had delusions of grandeur. Where are the children? Tyrion asked breathlessly, where is Joffrey and Tommen? In their beds. Cersei snapped, looking at him contemptuously, I will not disturb them just because you wish me to. She gestured her head towards Podrick, you're lucky I came myself. I will not be summoned like a hunting hound. Tyrion fought to suppress his temper, are they guarded? Cersei rolled her eyes, of course. Both have knights of the King's Guard with them. Right, Tyrion said, thinking fast. You are to immediately go to them, rouse them from their slumber. Get them dressed and bring them here. I shall do no such thing. His sister's eyes glittered in the torchlight. Why not? Tyrion asked urgently. Gods, they were so pressed for time. Cersei drew herself up. I shall not move until you tell me what is going on. He stared at her in the darkness. Is she japing? Do you remember what we discussed a day or two ago? That the enemy is all around us and that we need to do something about it. Cersei snapped at him impatiently. Yes, yes. I remember you talking in great detail about how we're doomed. So far there has been no evidence of you being right. I have evidence, Tyrion blurted out. Meryn Trant arrived in the city today and informed me that my theories were correct. Father's army was destroyed by the Starks. Baelish betrayed us and has joined the Young Wolf. Father and Jaime's whereabouts are unknown and the Starks are headed south. The Queen stared at him. Jaime disappeared. Tyrion could have slapped her. Of all the things she chooses to dwell on is that her lover is most likely dead. I will grieve our brother too, but when we're safe. He turned to Bronn and Podrick. Leave us alone for a moment. Go make sure the way is clear. The two men walked away back to the entrance of the wood. Podrick only paused to hand his torch to Tyrion before he left. Tyrion turned to face his sister. We don't know what's happened, he said gently. But we must assume the worst. However, Jaime survived battle with the Starks before, he's like to do so again. Cersei seemed to sway, slight tears coming from her eyes. For a second Tyrion feared she may lose herself, but some deep well of resolve seemed to firm inside his sister as she looked down at him. Well then, we must fortify the city. Seal the gates and prepare for another attack. To what end? Tyrion asked, fighting for calm. We don't have an efficient fighting force to resist with, and there is no one riding to our rescue this time. Use the Golden Company, Cersei snapped. You say they're a threat, but there's been no proof of that. They've been sat outside our walls pleasantly enough. If they had joined the fight against us, they'd have taken the city by now. You've already said we couldn't stop them. That was true enough. Tyrion knew, in fact, the Golden Company's passiveness was the one thing that troubled him beyond all others. Still, he was not about to look a gift horse in the mouth. If they are content to sit outside our walls, then let them. Sir Meryn says that the Golden Company abandoned Father at the start of the battle. I don't know who they are working for, but it's certainly not us. So what do you propose to do? Cersei asked him. Tyrion took a deep breath. We have no choice. We must leave the city. The Queen looked at him, startled. Leave? Where would we go? She bunched her fists at her side. There is nowhere safe for us to flee to. There is one place, Tyrion said. He cursed inwardly. I had hoped to have her on the boat by now. We'd already be committed and she'd have no choice but to go along with it. I believe we should head north and surrender ourselves to Robb Stark. Cersei stared at him. Long moments passed, then, slowly, fury etched itself over every inch of her face. You, traitor. Tyrion merely looked at her quizzically. Let's hope we can get this over with fast. The Queen glared at him, as disgusted as if she had just stepped in some animal excrement. You want to abandon the capital? Leave the city in the hands of usurpers and flee to the very enemy who wants to destroy our family? What choice do we have? Tyrion asked quietly. Cersei exploded. She gripped him by the shoulders and pushed him against a nearby tree. He dropped the torch in the scuffle and it hit the muddy floor, the flames guttering and dying. Darkness seemed to close in all around them. He could no longer see her face. Choices? She hissed. We have plenty of choices. We stand and we fight. With what? He asked, his voice barely above a whisper. His sister was gripping his shoulder so tightly her nails were cutting through the leather of his tunic and piercing his shoulder. He grit his teeth but refused to show any kind of pain. With the forces in the city. The Lannister guardsmen, the Gold Cloaks, your clansmen. How many of them are now loyal to us, do you think? Tyrion said, finding it difficult to ignore the pain in his back as his burnt flesh rested against the tree. How many do you think Varys has won over? You coward! She screamed at him. You once said you were the captain of the ship, that you'd go down with it if needs be. Turns out your words were merely that. Nothing but hot air. He felt rage building within him. With a mighty heave, the pain in his back and shoulder augmenting his strength, he pushed back against her. Cersei reeled backwards. She tripped over a tree root and sprawled on the floor. Tyrion loomed over her. I am willing to fight, and die, for the family, sweet sister. I did that during the Blackwater for all the thanks I got from you and father. I killed for this family and was almost killed in turn. But this is different. I am prepared to fight a battle that I have a chance of winning. I will not fight when there is no chance of success. The city may well have turned against us. I have no desire to be stabbed in the back by my own men. He stepped back. Cersei got to feet, her eyes glaring daggers at her brother, though she was wary not to come too close. So you mean to run to Robb Stark? Of all our enemies, Tyrion explained, he is the more reasonable. If we surrender to him, bend the knee, then he might just let us live. Joffrey will have to abdicate and I'll have to surrender Casterly Rock, but there it is. Father plotted to kill Robb Stark's wife and unborn child. Cersei cried, what mercy do you expect from him? We had nothing to do with that. Tyrion said, trying to be calm. That was father's plot. We had no knowledge of it. What if the Starks refuse to believe you? Then we die. Tyrion snarled, but we have a better chance than if we surrender to Stannis or whoever the Golden Company is working for. Robb Stark is reputably his father's son. Lord Eddard would never kill children. Both Pycelle and Varys tell me he refused to obey Robert's order to assassinate Daenerys Targaryen. His son is not like to execute Joffrey and Tommen out of hand. Which is more than can be said for any of our other foes. His sister stepped away. She was hunched over as if preparing for another attack. Like a feral cat that doesn't realize she faces a friend. Perhaps her only friend. Why leave? Cersei spat, if what you say is true, then Robb Stark will be here soon enough. We can surrender to him without bothering to move. Tyrion almost hit her. Have you forgotten? The Golden Company is here, now. They are the most pressing concern. They sit right there, beyond our gates. Even more reason to fortify and wait our enemies out. Cersei declared. We have no time. Tyrion almost shouted at her. Trant's arrival would have been spotted by Varys' spies. He'll know that Trant has returned, and he'll know it's likely that the man will tell us the truth of events in the Riverlands. If I was him, I'd move up my timetable and act before we're ready. We must leave tonight before the trap is sprung. How would we leave then? Cersei asked, her eyes so narrow they were nothing more than slits. The company sits between us and our supposed saviors. Tyrion gulped, I have a small boat down at the docks. When you bring Joffrey and Tommen, we'll go there tonight, sail upriver. Why not out to the bay? That is exactly what the enemy would expect. Tyrion replied. We'll head away from the bay and then up to the waters of the God's Eye. We'll then cross country to Harrenhal or wherever the Stark army is. Cersei shook her head, you would risk the king in open country. Tyrion looked exasperated at her. He won't be the king for much longer. He's at risk here. We'll bring a few trusted guards with us and the entirety of the Kingsguard. Not to mention Shae. That should be sufficient to get us to the Starks. You put a lot of faith in our enemies. Cersei stated. Tyrion straightened. I prefer the enemies I know to the ones I don't. His sister looked at him for silently. For a glorious moment he thought he'd won her over, but then she shook her head. No. No. Tyrion repeated. Shock making his tone almost shrill. No, Cersei confirmed, I will not flee. I am a Lannister. At least I still know what that means. I won't run. I won't hide. I will fight. I would rather die than surrender. Like you tried to do when Stannis attacked. Cersei recoiled from him, her eyes were as wide as shields. How did you know? I've always known, Tyrion said, feeling his restraint fall away. Did you not think it odd that the poison you gave Tommen failed to work? His sister's breath came in short gasps. You. Me. Tyrion said simply. I knew you'd try and secure an easy way out if the battle turned ill, so I had Pycelle give you a harmless potion instead of the sleeping draught you asked for. Unlike you, I had no desire to see Tommen die because of your cowardice. Turns out the old fool wasn't willing to be the one who helped kill Tywin Lannister's daughter. Cersei shook her head back and forth as if trying to dislodge unwelcome thoughts from it. Tyrion moved to capitalize. He reached for her hand. I saved your son then, and I am trying to do the same now. I'll even save Joffrey if I can. The Queen reeled away from him. You've always hated him. She seethed, backing away and heading towards the path. She looked at him in the gloom. My children will stay here and no one will take them from me. With that she ran back into the open and back to the keep. He gave chase but her legs were longer than his stunted limbs. Within moments she was through the gateway and back into the Red Keep, leaving Tyrion to waddle helplessly behind her. It took him a few minutes to reach the gate. He arrived just as Podrick reached the other side. Tyrion put a hand on the stone surface. He was breathing hard. Did you see the Queen? The boy nodded. Yes, my lord. He pointed aimlessly towards Maegor's Holdfast. She went that way. Tyrion made to follow her but his squire stepped in front of him. What is it, Pod? The boy gulped. My lord, Sir Bronn bid me tell you that an army has been spotted on the south bank of the Blackwater. We think they are going to cross the river. That's all I need. Stannis, it was the only force he could think of. 7 hells, why didn't the scouts spot them? He's not sure, my lord, Bronn said guiltily, but the men look different than those of Lord Stannis. There are also ships entering the bay. From inside the castle screams and shouts could be heard. The sounds of men in combat seemed to echo from the very stones. The trap is closing in on us. Tyrion sighed. We're out of time. Varys is making his move. Right, Pod, find Bronn. You know where the boat is. Get yourself to it. Wait as long as you can and then cast off. My lord. The shock and fear radiated from the boy. Come with us, please. Tyrion looked towards Maegor's Holdfast and then down the steps that would take him to the boat. To safety. If I go now I could live. I could probably escape and have some kind of honorable captivity with the Starks, assuming I made it that far. If I go back into the castle I'll probably be killed. What would Jaime do? Tyrion turned to his servant. Go on, Pod. I'll find the Queen and her children and try and get them to the boat. We'll need you ready to leave as soon as we arrive. Stay as long as you can but don't jeopardize your own safety. The boy nodded. He searched Tyrion's face for doubt but found none. Yes, my lord. He said, tears running down his cheeks. Go on, lad, Tyrion said, patting his arm. He looked up at him. Pod, I want you to know, there has never lived a more loyal squire. The boy nodded and, at Tyrion's urging, turned and ran back the way he had come. Sighing, Tyrion turned to the castle entranceway. Here goes nothing then. The stone was cool to the touch, its rough edges scratching his hand as he edged his way along the wall and up a flight of steps. He made himself as small as possible. An easier task for me than for others. Finally the curse of my birth works in my favor. He climbed the stairs and made his way down a corridor. The sounds of fighting and killing came from all around him. He passed corridors where men lay dead, lying on the floor where they'd been slain. He passed other rooms where men had surrendered and laid down their weapons. As he moved slowly towards his destination he saw columns of soldiers from the Golden Company herd members of the castle garrison out into courtyards and other open spaces. There were servants of the Red Keep amongst the prisoners. They sat huddled in groups, some crying softly, others just staring blankly in shock. Bastards must have snuck in a few at a time. Took the castle completely by surprise. Varys always was a clever little cunt. He could hear horns from across the river. It made his mind go back to the attack on the city by Stannis Baratheon. There would be no rescue for us this time. Tyrion rounded a corner and headed towards the royal apartments. With luck he might be able to find Cersei and her sons there. He knew he was on a fool's errand. The first thing any enemy would do while attacking the keep would be to secure the royal family. Joffrey, Cersei and even Tommen would be priority targets. Any attempt to rescue his family would likely be met with severe opposition, and there he was, not even armed. But I have to try. Tyrion edged down the corridor, flattening himself against any wall at any approaching sound. As he passed a window he risked looking over the ledge and glancing down at the city below. The capital looked relatively peaceful. There was no fire or signs of fighting. It appeared that the battle was limited to the Red Keep itself. That's generous of our enemy. The small folk of this city have suffered enough. A burst of wind from the window struck Tyrion's face, robbing him of breath and pushing him back into the corridor. He gasped loudly. Where in seven hells had that come from? He didn't have time to concern himself with that now. He continued his journey down the corridor and into a balcony area of an open-air courtyard. He knew that this area lined a feast hall situated below. A private dining area for the king and his immediate circle. Tyrion stepped closer and looked over the railing. Below him, in the middle of the courtyard, were two lines of soldiers. At their head was a man with long blue hair, next to him was a younger version of the same figure. The hair was the same color, the same build, though he was clearly still growing, he looked gangly, awkward. The younger of the two kept looking into the sky above Tyrion, seemingly searching for something that Tyrion himself could not see. Well, it appears that the older man is likely Strickland's replacement. Tyrion pushed away and started to move around the outer edge of the courtyard. If he was lucky then they'd never see him from the ground below. There! A shout behind him rang out. There's the imp. Fuck. Tyrion had been so preoccupied with the men below that he hadn't been paying attention to who was behind him. He whirled to see a member of the Golden Company crossing the balcony area with his sword drawn. Tyrion looked around him for a weapon but there was none to be found. He prepared to run. A blood-curdling roar resounded across the stone walls of the Red Keep. The sound vibrations were so strong they almost knocked Tyrion over. He staggered against the courtyard railing as the almighty sound overwhelmed his ears and made him lose his balance. He clapped his hands to his ears as the walls amplified the sounds again and again, causing him to seize his head in abject pain. What the seven hells is this? He fell to one knee. A quick glance confirmed that the man who had identified him and fared no better. The man was on both knees, his sword on the floor in front of him, his hands clutching the side of his head. Tyrion readied himself to run for the sword. All thoughts of sounds and his ears was forgotten. His plan quickly dissipated as, suddenly a beast of monstrous size flew over the courtyard. Tyrion fell back to the floor as the harsh wind current buffeted him about as if he was a bush in a storm. He hit the floor and lay on his back helplessly as he watched the night sky. Another roar sounded, though, mercifully, this one came from some way off. As he thought this, the stone wall above him creaked and moaned. Without warning, massive talons came over the rim of the courtyard wall. These claws were followed by a massive head that reared up over the edge and looked down into the courtyard. There were shouts of fear from the ground below, followed by a stern order from someone for the men to hold their ground. The creature looked down, breathing heavily. Its fetid breath hit Tyrion square on, but the stench didn't faze him. He could only stare up in abject wonder. As the creature climbed and straddled the courtyard with two massive legs, it shifted its weight. Tyrion got a glimpse of a young woman, with long white hair, sat on the creature's back, her slender hands grasping a saddle, a look of steely determination on her face. He gulped long and hard. Dragons had returned to King's Landing. Chapter 51, Daenerys I. Chapter text. Her foot touched the surface of the Red Keep, her toes curing slightly as they made contact with the cool red stone. She lifted herself down gingerly as the dragon shook beneath her. She had to cling to the spiked ridges of its spine to stop herself from falling to the floor. He's excited, he wants to be off with the others soaring above the city walls. She leaned in and whispered softly into Drogon's ear, commanding the beast to behave itself. Much good will that do. She patted the animal's hide, its skin tough against the flesh of her hand. She whispered once more and then stepped back as the creature gathered itself and took off from the balcony. She watched the dragon fly away from her. Please don't let him and his brothers get too excited. I do not want to start my reign by inspiring terror in the populace. I want or not horror. She allowed herself a moment to sigh before abruptly turning to face the men behind her. They were her own soldiers. Unsullied, clad in the leather armor of their unit. At the front was Grey Worm, who stood watching her. Where are the Golden Company? She asked, looking about her. There was no one on the expanse of balcony that did not seem to serve her. Where are the rest? This one does not know. Grey Worm admitted without expression on his face. The young Soldier stood rigidly to attention, showing no sign of outward exertion, though she knew he must have charged through the city at great speed to be here before her. There was no other way to have made it from the docks to this room in so short a time. This is the appointed place where you commanded us to meet them. We have seen the company soldiers all throughout the castle, but not one of those we saw moved to stop us. It would appear they have control here. That Varys' plan worked. And yet there is no one to meet us. Daenerys mused. How rude of Connington and the boy he was supposed to be the guardian of not to meet us here. Well, we shall not wait for them, Daenerys said, turning away from the balcony and walking towards a staircase. They will just have to catch up. Grey Worm and a detachment of his Unsullied fell in around her as they made their way down the stairs and through a wide corridor. Daenerys had no need to check her direction. She had made a point of studying maps of the castle that Varys had sent them in advance of their arrival. She knew the Red Keep as well as anyone in the land. It was built by her forefathers as a monument to their reign. Dany felt that it was absolutely right that she knew as much of its layout as possible. Around her she saw the denizens of the castle being rounded up. Prisoners were being herded together, some still in their night clothes. The prisoners stumbled around in wide-eyed fear, some wearing barely anything and shivering, some from the cold night air, others from fear. Daenerys saw a young girl, presumably a chambermaid, being manhandled by 2 soldiers of the Golden Company. They looked to be pushing her towards a small doorway. I want no rapes or murders, Daenerys declared to the commander of her Unsullied. If I hear that men have taken advantage of tonight events in any way, then I shall have the perpetrators crucified. Unsullied do not rape women, my queen, Grey Worm said in a harsh tone. Of course not, Daenerys replied. Nor would they be capable of doing so even if they so desired. I was referring to our new allies. Have the word go round that any man will be punished for breaking my command. Grey Worm nodded his obedience and rapped out an order to the man behind him. Daenerys paid the men around her no more mind as she made her way across the courtyard. She neared the large wooden doors that marked the entrance to the Great Hall. Her heart hammered in her chest as she realized she was about to enter the center of the Red Keep, the focal point of power within Westeros. As she approached the door, she was pleased to see Unsullied already guarding the heavy door. Her men stood to attention, their form as still as statues. In front of the door, though, were 2 figures that were very unlike Unsullied yet similar in many ways. Ser Jorah Mormont stood, fully armored in the plate armor her had brought with him to Essos after he went into exile. She hadn't seen him wear this particular armor for over a year, since before they made their trip through the Red Waste together on their way to Qarth. The weather of Essos was too hot for the type of armor typically worn by the Westerosi. During his time with her, the Ser Jorah had taken to wearing a set of leather armor that offered him some protection from the weapons of Essos, yet was unlike or prevented him from passing out due to heat exhaustion while still offering protection from the weapons of the East. Now though, Ser Jorah had taken to wearing his old armor. It was good to see him like this once again. She was glad that he had confessed his treason to her, though she was certain this had been done at Ser Barristan and Varys' urging. It had taken a lot to forgive his actions, but she had, and she was glad of it. Next to him stood her chief protector, the Lord Commander of her Queensguard. Ser Barristan Selmy was standing with his hand on the pommel of his sword, eyeing the corridor with curious intensity. He smiled briefly as he saw her approach. Ser Jorah stepped forward. Your Grace. The city is ours. So soon? The Lannisters gave way beneath us then? She asked cautiously. The man nodded. Between our forces attacking from the bay and the Golden Company attacking from within, the garrison surrendered. I don't blame them. The Gold Cloaks have also come over to our side and report to us. Another of the Spider's machinations? She asked, already knowing the answer. The knight fought, and failed to keep a look of distaste from crossing his features. Who else? He muttered with loathing. She smiled at the man, not to fret Ser Jorah. He's on our side, is he not? The man could only nod sullenly. Taking that for agreement, she turned to the older knight. Ser Barristan, do we know who's in there? Barristan inclined his head. Cersei Lannister has her 2 sons in there with a few retainers and a number of protectors. Joffrey Baratheon's Kingsguard. Ser Barristan's face displayed contempt. What passes for Kingsguard these days? His face softened. Apologies, Your Grace, I should not let my personal feelings rule me. Daenerys patted his arm. It is of no matter, Sir Barristan. Today we make many wrongs right once more. She looked from the men to the door. Why are you still outside, gentlemen? Have they barricaded themselves in? No, Your Grace. Barristan stiffened to attention. They seem to be awaiting your arrival. She allowed herself a wide smile. Well then, by all means, let's not keep those inside waiting. Sir Barristan paused. Ought we not to wait for Connington, Your Grace? Daenerys grimaced. You mean, wait for Aegon? No, they will be here soon. I have waited for this moment long enough. She turned to the side. Grey Worm. At her signal the commander of the Unsullied motioned to his men, who quickly stood back and pulled on the massive doors. With a heave they opened and admitted the party into the large space. A line of Unsullied went ahead of her, watching for any attack. Dany stepped into the room, escorted by Jorah, Barristan and Grey Worm. Together the group moved slowly into the cavernous room. It was like stepping into one of her dreams. The room was large, larger than she had expected. The space could easily have housed several of the throne rooms she had adopted in the Pyramid of Meereen. There was a thick carpet that ran from the entrance, through the center of the room, to the far end of the hall. There were 2 lines of pillars that ran down the sides, next to balconies that overlooked the central concourse. Each stone pillar was easily the width of a wagon wheel, and each seems to have braziers built around them and were alight with flame that gave the room an awful feeling of being on fire. I do not fear flame. It was the far end of the chamber that drew her eye. As her ancestor Aegon had intended. There at the end of the chamber, seeming to grow like a grotesque metallic tree, was the Iron Throne of Westeros. The mass of melted swords and jagged steel sprung from the floor and reached towards the ceiling. It was several meters high and stood at a sharp angle so that those who stood before it were forced to look up in respect, a tacit reminder that the throne, and those who sat upon it, were masters of all before them. Currently occupying the seat made up of jagged swords and metal weapons was the boy King Joffrey Baratheon, the spawn of the usurper. The boy sat on the throne, seemingly jumping up and down in nervous excitement. How interesting. He genuinely seems unafraid. Dany's party strode into the room. The Unsullied fanned out to the flanks, a screen of spears and shields to protect their queen from the people at the side of the room. There were not many to be seen, just a few court retainers and guards. Dany saw a group of gold cloaks, around 20 in all, milling about by the back of the throne near Cersei Lannister and the king's brother, Tommen. The boy was wrapped in his mother's arms as she stood next to the throne, casting concerned glances up at her eldest son. Dany almost paused when her gaze lowered. There, at the base of the throne, stood 5 figures clad in gleaming white armor. In the torchlight the knights seemed to sparkle, so polished were their armor and weapons. Joffrey Baratheon's Kingsguard. The best warriors in the realm. She turned her head. Well, I have a Kingsguard of my own. Barristan Selmy was there, as always, at her shoulder, moving determinedly as he guarded her back. His hand rested on the pommel of the sword she had given him on Pentos. His face was emotionless. He did not seem surprised at all to see members of the Order guarding the king. These men are Kingsguard, where else would they be? They stopped a short distance from the throne, a good 3/4 of the way down the hall. Dany stood on the thick red carpet looking around her at the hunting tapestries that hung from the walls. Viserys once told me that the skulls of the Targaryen dragons adorned these walls. I wonder where they are now. Despite her musing, her gaze always returned to the throne and the boy sitting upon it. As her group came to a stop, Joffrey stood. We bid you welcome to Westeros, my lady. Your presence brings glory to our hall. The voice was young and immature, full of piss and mock bravery. Dany blinked. Does he think I'm here to support him, to save him from her enemies? Can he not know? She almost laughed out loud. Oh, this is too sweet. She looked up at the boy before the throne. I thank you for your welcome. I was most surprised to receive your grandfather's invitation back to Westeros. She looked around the room. It is a pity Lord Tywin is not here to greet me himself. Joffrey's mouth tightened. My grandfather had taken the royal army north to deal with the rebels. He opened his arms. Even so, we can make you welcome. Most kind, I'm sure. Dany responded. There was a moment of awkward silence. Joffrey looked uncertainly at his mother before looking back at Dany. "I have heard of your beauty, my lady, but the stories hardly do you justice. I consider myself most fortunate to be betrothed to someone so radiant." He trots out compliments as if writing a poem. Dany smiled. "I would think that you would have more important tasks than to arrange a wedding. Your kingdom is beset by rebels." Joffrey's smile faltered as he stared at her. "Not to worry, my lady. My grandfather is marching to put matters right. By now Robb Stark's head will be decorating the walls of Riverrun. Though there are plenty of enemies to the west, we will soon set about punishing them." He looked at the men to her side. "A task that will only be made easier by the addition of your own valiant forces to our ranks." She titled her head. "What of the Golden Company? It would seem that you have enemies in your own hall." Joffrey's lips curled in anger. "They are of no consequence, my lady. The traitors will be dealt with." He really has no idea. Poor boy, to be kept so unaware by his family and advisors. I would be minded to feel sorry for him. Were he not a Baratheon? Dany allowed herself a broad smile, though her expression was tinged with sadness. "I regret that you may be under some misapprehension, Your Grace." Joffrey stared at her, his brows furrowed in confusion. "What do you mean? Time to end this farce. I'm afraid that I am not here to deal with the Golden Company. I am here to lead them. The sellswords that have just taken control of the city, and the very keep you call home, have pledged to serve me." Not an entirely true statement, but it will serve us for these purposes. Cersei stepped out from behind her son, drawing the young boy behind her. "You agreed to ally with House Lannister. You agreed to marry Joffrey and join our armies in an alliance." Dany eyed the older woman with contempt. "I agreed to no such thing. I would never ally with House Lannister. Ever." Cersei looked down at the line of Kingsguard before the throne. She looked up again. "You agreed to my father's." "You are mistaken," Dany said flatly. "Your father invited me to return to Westeros, and to that I agreed, but I said nothing of an alliance. I would never ally with your family. Your house breeds nothing but traitors and murderers. My one regret with Lord Tywin not being here is that I'm not able to serve him the justice he so richly deserved." "But you agreed." "I agreed to return to Westeros, and here I am, though I am not here to save your miserable family from the position that you have placed yourself in." Dany looked around the room. "I am here to take what is mine. To reclaim what was stolen from my family many years ago. I have no desire to ally with House Lannister," her lip turned in disgust, "nor of marrying that child who sits on a throne he has no right to." Joffrey sprung forward to the edge of the throne's platform. His face had gone completely white. "I am the king," he bellowed, his eyes full of hate and rage. Dany regarded him coldly. "You are an errant child. Call yourself whatever you like. You will do so, however, from the cells." The boy king looked so angry that Dany thought he might froth at the mouth. The king looked down at his bodyguards. "Sir Meryn. Bring me her head." He glanced around. "Bring me all their heads. Kill them all. I command it." As the Kingsguard knights drew their weapons, Dany saw Cersei shout up at her son, though her words were lost in the clamor of swords being unsheathed. Whatever the Queen Mother said was dismissed by her son, who absently waved his hand at her. "Now Sir Meryn!" the boy screamed. The Kingsguard fanned out. They looked most impressive in their white gleaming armor. They advanced towards her group. Their helms hid any expression, but Dany knew they must have felt a small amount of fear about attacking a much larger group. She had not stopped to count, but Dany was certain that she had brought at least 50 men into the room with her. Still, the majority of her men were equipped with leather armor. The force facing them wore heavy plate, the very best castle-forged steel that money could buy. Though outnumbered, the Kingsguard would fell a great many of her men down before they yielded. "Surrender the girl," the Kingsguard at the head of the group commanded. "There is no need for the rest of you to suffer for her betrayal. I could have made the same offer to you. But no." Dany turned her head a fraction to the side. "Sir Barristan." The old knight stepped forward, past the queen, and strode towards the oncoming enemy. As he walked, he undid the clasps of his cloak and let it fall, the fabric pooling on the ground behind him. He drew his sword, the blade rippling in the torchlight. A curious combination of red and gold seemed to fire along the blade, it glimmered ominously in the light from the braziers. The King's Guard seemed surprised as the old knight advanced towards them. They paused for a moment, but, when they saw that no one else was accompanying the lone warrior, they continued to make their progress towards him, only stopping a small distance away. Sir Meryn Selmy greeted the lead knight. "I'd recognize that halting step anywhere." He looked around at the men who were in a loose semicircle in front of him. "Tell your men to stand down and they will be treated according to their rank." The other man scoffed inside his helm. "There are 5 of us, old man, and only 1 of you. You should have stayed in exile." "I serve the rightful ruler of Westeros," Trant Selmy said disdainfully, "something you would know nothing about." He surveyed the knights. "I once stood in this same place and said I could cut through the 5 of you as easily as I might carve a cake. While some of my erstwhile brothers seem to have been replaced, my claim still stands." "Fucking hell!" one knight cried impatiently, stepping around Trant. "Let's do him now." "Then come," said Barristan the Bold. The impatient Kingsguard leapt forward and brought his sword down at the head of Sir Barristan. In an instant Dany's protector had slipped inside the arc of the blade. His own weapon swept upwards and struck the man deep in the chest. The blade sundered the armor and slashed through the flesh beneath, carving a bloody path and lodging in the lower part of the knight's head. "That's one." Before the Kingsguard even knew he was dead, Sir Barristan had passed the falling corpse to engage the next opponent. He wrenched his sword free, a slight twist of the blade pulling the weapon loose from the body of his victim. The Kingsguard knights paused to glance at each other, but that was all the time they had. The knights did not even know what hit them before Selmy was among them, hacking and slicing. His sword moved like lightning, turning blows aside as he ducked and weaved among his would-be assailants. The glimmering sword flashed sideways and a Kingsguard fell backward, his sword falling from his fingers as he clawed at the massive wound in his throat. Blood gushed down the man's pristine armor as he pitched to the floor. 2. Selmy didn't pause to examine his work. He lunged forward, upending one of his foes to the floor as he parried a blow from another man. Barristan spun and stabbed outwards, caving in the side of yet another knight and warding off the strikes from his comrade. The injured knight sunk to his knees and only had the chance to lift his helm before Selmy decapitated him with a quick flick of his sword. 3. The knight still standing tried vainly to hold Sir Barristan off as his comrade rolled to his feet. The two regrouped and tried to advance together, but Selmy would not give them the chance. The old knight, who had been a warrior since before Dany had been born, moved so quickly he was nothing but a blur. He fought both men at once, not breaking stride, nor even a sweat as he parried the men's strikes and returned his own blows with determined vigor. One of the knights, seeing what he thought was an opening, stepped wide and drove his sword at Selmy's neck. Without pause, Sir Barristan swayed away from the strike, let it pass, and then stepped back in to thrust his own sword deep into the groin of his enemy. The blade bit deep, bursting from the man's behind in a spray of blood and gore. The other knight, thinking that the Selmy had trapped his own blade, lunged in and swung his sword in a low arc, but Barristan wasn't there. The old knight used the still struggling body of his latest victim as a shield, pushing the dying man into the sword strike and letting him take the blow meant for himself. The sword blow felled the injured knight, who fell to the floor with a muffled wail where he stilled, his blood flowing from the open wound in his groin like a torrent. 4. Selmy eyed his last remaining opponent without a flicker of emotion on his face. The Kingsguard had no expression either, his face obscured by the heavy white helm he wore on his head. Even so, the man's uncertainty was palpable as he looked down at his 4 dead or dying brothers. The knight looked from their ruined bodies to Barristan Selmy. The man had not taken so much as a scratch, was not even breathing heavily, as he examined the last man with interest. "It's not too late, Trant," Selmy said. "Stand down." The knight gave a battle cry and dived forward, making one last attempt to fell the man who faced him. Sir Barristan weaved once more and seemed to merely stride past his attack. The Kingsguard made it about a short distance forward and then stopped. Selmy did not even turn towards him as the knight suddenly dropped his sword with limp fingers. The man seemed to hug his side and then he screamed in pain. Dany saw the armor was torn at the side which Selmy had passed. She realized with a start that her Lord Commander had killed the man as he had ducked out of the way, racking Trant's entire side with the sword she had given him. A Valyrian steel sword. Dark Sister, the sword of Queen Visenya during the conquest, recovered and kept in the Red Keep for generations until Varys found it and sent it to Pentos for me. Who better to wield it than the man who is my foremost protector? The fine weapon was so amazingly sharp that it had cut through Trant's Kingsguard armor as if it was wet parchment, striking the flesh and organs within. The knight stood for a moment, blood gushing onto the floor before he fell to the floor. Dead before he struck the surface. 5. Sir Barristan Selmy stood ahead of her. The 5 corpses of the Baratheon Kingsguard in between him and Dany. He merely looked up at the throne, his face impassive. Joffrey stared in abject shock and horror at the old man who now stood close to him. Almost at the foot of his throne. He looked in fear at his mother before turning to his remaining guards, the Gold Cloaks. Take him. I command it. Kill them. Kill them all. Ser Jorah stepped forward, stand down. All of you. No one else needs to die. The men shot uncertain looks at the king, Ser Jorah, the Kingsguard corpses and then finally at Barristan Selmy who regarded them unflinchingly. Under his steely gaze the small group of men dropped their spears and swords to clatter loudly on the stone floor. The men raised their empty hands, surrendering to the Unsullied who quickly came forward and took them into custody. Dany's soldiers brushed past Cersei Lannister and Tommen as if they were barely there and within moments the dais was cleared of all people beside the royal family. Joffrey looked to be in the deepest state of shock. He had sat down on the Iron Throne as if he could draw comfort from the tough surface, perhaps hoping that the confines of the large chair would offer protection from his enemies. Dany stepped forward. I believe you're in my seat. The boy said nothing. It's quite a reversal for just a few minutes. To go from greeting your would-be ally to suddenly having them turn on you, then to have your own sworn shields be killed in front of you by an old man you dismissed from your service and then to have your last remaining protectors ignore your orders and surrender without a fight. I imagine it's quite a shock. Ser Jorah walked towards the throne. Please step down, boy. This time it was Cersei who spoke. How dare you? Joffrey is the king. Jorah Mormont looked at her. Not anymore, he isn't. Dany was certain that the king's mother would have argued some more, but, at a gesture from Grey Worm, soldiers came forward and took the woman's arms and began to drag her unceremoniously from the hall. She thrashed and clawed at them, but it was like battering her fists against a stone wall for all the effect her struggles had. Tommen went behind her, the boy looking sullen and upset. He allowed himself to be led meekly towards the door of the great hall. For his part, Joffrey did nothing as his family was taken away. He seemed unable to comprehend the events going on around him. He remained seated heavily on the throne some distance away from them. It would not be easy to get the boy down if he refused to yield. The staircase was narrow and surrounded by steel barbs. Any person going up there would run the risk of serious injury if the boy opted to struggle. How ludicrous. I have traveled the length of the world for this moment and I'm being waylaid by some boy who simply won't move. She turned to Ser Jorah. How would you suggest we bring him down? She asked with a forced levity to her tone. I can bring him down. A voice sounded from over Dany's shoulder. She didn't need to look to identify the man whom the confident voice belonged. Daario Naharis was leaning against one of the pillars to the side of the room, one of the few without a fire at its base. He pushed himself away from the stone and strolled towards them idly. How do you propose to do that? Jorah asked, his eyes narrowing. The boy is terrified. As he should be, Daario said, his mouth curling into a grotesque smile, marring his handsome features. Still, you want him down? I do. Dany said seriously. As your grace wishes. As quick as a flash, Daario pulled a small knife from the sash at his waist, rotated it so that he now gripped it by its point and then, without warning, threw the missile at Joffrey Baratheon. The blade smacked into the throne, slicing the boy's arm. Joffrey let out a cry of pain and looked fearfully with tear-filled eyes as blood gushed from the wound in his arm. The next one goes through your eye, Daario called up cheerfully, slowly drawing a second knife from a baldric on his chest. Enough of this, Sir Barristan declared, stepping forward. Come down, boy. Now. Slowly, tentatively, Joffrey Baratheon stood up and began to make his way down the steep steps of the Iron Throne. He cradled his bloody arm with his injured arm. Tears were streaming down his face and he was biting his lower lip. He was sniveling in pain and fear. Gingerly he reached the bottom and looked up at the group in front of him. "Please," he said, looking every inch the frightened boy he was, don't hurt me. Not a word about his family or servants. They would have wed me to this mewling child." In disgust, Dany motioned to Grey Worm, who had his men grab the boy and escort him out. She knew they were bound for the cells, where Joffrey would remain until Dany decided what to do with him. After a moment the boy was gone, his sniffling and whining out of earshot. And so ends the Baratheon dynasty. With a nod of finality, Dany turned her attention to the throne, which now sat empty and cold, though still appeared intimidating to the party in the hall. "But not cold or intimidating to me. No, to me I've never felt so warm or welcome in my life." Dany stepped up a few of the stone steps to the base of the actual throne. None of her men came with her. She suspected they were all allowing her a moment to herself. She looked over the throne, her hand idly running over a section of the jagged metal. She had heard rumors that people cut themselves on the throne. That some kings had actually been pierced and died as a result. The superstitious amongst the small folk whispered that the throne itself was alive and would execute an unworthy soul who dared to sit upon it. Viserys had always dismissed this story as nonsense, a tale invented by the small-minded. He was right. If the throne punished the unworthy, how had it let the usurper occupy it for so many years? Her hand was undamaged as it brushed the metal. It felt cool to the touch. Even though it hadn't moved, she felt a curious thrumming through her fingertips, as if the throne was calling to her. Though perhaps that is just the hammering of my own heart that I feel. The yearning merely one of my own soul. She slowly placed a foot on the first step of the throne. She glanced up to see the top of the metal structure, the seated section surrounded by swords and daggers. She pushed herself up and began to ascend the stairs. Behind her was deathly silence. She imagined that her men were watching as she scaled the small hill of metal. She climbed slowly and steadily, conscious to appear casual yet dignified as she claimed her inheritance, the rightful throne of her forefathers. "Wait." Dany whirled at the command. "Who dares?" The sight meeting her eyes brought her up short and her mouth working soundlessly as she silently raged. Through the main doors of the hall another party had arrived. A group of hardened sellswords surrounding a grizzled warrior. The tall man walked through the hall bound for her one group that turned to face the new arrivals. As she took in the man, Dany had a recollections of Willem d'Ari, the Targaryen retainer who had served as master-at-arms of the Red Keep before he smuggled Daenerys and her brother across the narrow sea to Essos. To the house with the red door. She was convinced that the man was larger, though, taller and more muscled than Sir Willem had been. The man striding down the length of the great hall towards her was a Solidar, a warrior born. A lion amongst wolves. But it was the figure walking beside the warrior that drew Dany's interest. The youth was lithe and well-built, though somewhat lanky, as if he had not quite grown into the man he would be. That being said, he was at least as tall as the man beside him, and handsome besides. The boy had purple hair, dyed in the style of the East, but there was the beginnings of silver-white hair beginning to grow through from the base of his head. Hair very much like Daenerys' own. The boy was good-looking, she had to give him that. But is he a dragon? With one last wistful look she turned away from the throne to face the oncoming group. She saw Grey Worm raise a hand and form his men up in a shield line before the throne. Daario, Barristan and Jorah Mormont all had their weapons drawn and looked ready to defend their queen. The boy, Aegon, she supposed, it could be no one else, spoke once more, his voice echoing of the stone walls. "That is not your throne." Her eyes blazed. "Impudent little wretch. And who are you to say what is or is not mine?" The youth stopped a safe distance away from the line of Unsullied facing him. I am the rightful ruler of Westeros. I am here to claim my throne." Daenerys would have smiled if outrage didn't render her immobile. "Well, he has the Targaryen presumptuousness if nothing else." "The lady before you is the rightful heir to the throne," Jorah Mormont spoke up. "She is Daenerys of House Targaryen, Queen of the Andals. And the First Men, and so on and so forth." The man next to the youth said. He too had purple in his hair, though it was giving way to a different color underneath, a steely red-gray that had started to come through from the roots. It suited him better than the purple dye. "Such posturing can wait, Sir Jorah." "How do you know my name?" Mormont looked suspicious. I know a great deal about you all, the man said, giving the group a quick glance. An advantage of being in the capital these last few months with nothing to do but learn. From the spider, you mean? Jorah was quick to say. Naturally, the man said affably, I have found Lord Varys to be a font of knowledge. I would have been a fool not to utilize it. I know all about you, Sir Jorah Mormont of Bear Island. Sir Jorah shifted his stance, and I know of you, Lord Jon Connington of Griffin's Roost. Formerly Hand of the King to Aerys. I had that honor, Connington said unsmilingly, though I failed in my task to bring the usurper to heel and was duly punished for it. He looked at the Queen. I serve House Targaryen and all its heirs. He paused. That being said, I do not think that throne is yours, my lady. He denies my birthright, but at least he does it with respect. How so, my lord? Dany asked politely, though she was sorely tempted to order her men to eliminate those who would deny her claim. I am the only living child of King Aerys, second of his name. You are, my lady, Connington said with a slight bow of his head. However, you are in the presence of the son of Prince Rhaegar, your beloved brother, who is the grandson of King Aerys and the rightful heir. Dany did not move from her place on the stairs, if I choose to regard him as such. Connington blinked. He reached up and grasped Aegon's shoulder, no doubt as a warning for him not to do anything rash. Come now, my lady, you know the law of succession. The oldest male heir always inherits. It is clear Aegon comes before you in his claim to the throne. Well, I knew when Illyrio told me of the boy that it would come to this. I just didn't think it would be the first thing to be discussed. Dany grit her teeth angrily. Even if I was to accept such a notion, the question remains, how do I know that the boy before me is my nephew? I have looked after Aegon since he was a child, Connington said, his grip on the youth tightening. Though the boy looked ready to attack them all, I will vouch that he is who he claims to be. The kingdom knows that Prince Aegon was killed in the sack of King's Landing. Jorah stated. Connington ignored the man, though he fixed Dany with an icy glare. Do you doubt my word? We doubt nothing, Dany said smoothly. Everyone knows who I am and my claim to the throne, and yet here you are before me pressing the suit of another claimant. I merely ask that you prove that he is who he says he is. Perhaps I can help. From a side door came Lord Varys, the spymaster. He stepped towards the group, his arms folded into ornate black heavy robes that hid his limbs as he approached. He cocked his head to the side. I can confirm, your grace, that the boy is exactly who he claims to be. He is your brother's son, your nephew by blood. Dany arched an eyebrow. So you say? As I say, the eunuch bowed before her. It was I that thought up and executed a plan to retrieve Prince Aegon from his nursing chamber, to replace him with a baby born to one of the servants and to spirit the boy away to Essos. The bald man gave her a knowing look, much as you yourself had been by other true servants to the crown. Aegon shook off Connington's hand and walked forward, leveling his unsheathed sword at the eunuch. And what of the rest of our family, you cur? What of my mother and sister? Varys gave the youth a sorrowful look. I regret that the king refused to allow his son's wife to leave the capital. He believed that the Dornish had betrayed him, though their men fought and died for House Targaryen upon the Trident. Even then he would not allow the family to leave, and Princess Elia would not have her daughter or son taken from her. As it was, I had to hide the substitution of yourself for the peasant boy from her. I did what I could to ensure the future, to carry on Prince Rhaegar's line. And what of me? Dany snarled from her place midway to the summit of the throne. Where was I in this future you were building? Or was I just dispensable? Varys' face grew pained. Not at all, your grace. I had high hopes for both of you, but the truth is that we were in perilous times, and it was best you were kept apart and separate so that you could not be found by other agents of Robert Baratheon. Better for you, you mean? Jorah stepped forward. You had me spy on the Queen for your own ends, Varys. You had me send secrets here so that you could relay them to Robert Baratheon and his toadies. To earn favor with a man you claim to have been working against. Dany felt the feeling that the conversation was spiraling out of her control. I told him nothing of importance, Varys said, and the stories I spun proved my usefulness and served to distract the king from any other concerns. He looked up at her. In any case, you were quite safe. By the time Robert was interested in you, you were already safely among the Dothraki horde, your grace. The chances of you being attacked by Robert's assassins was virtually non-existent. Ser Jorah stepped towards the man and pointed his sword at the eunuch's unprotected chest. Do you forget, Varys? You sent a poisoner to Vizduthrak to end the queen's life when you heard she was pregnant with the Kul's child. The memory was sharp as it ever was. The merchant offering her a tainted cup of wine, doctored to give her a quick death. Of Sir Jorah interceding just in time and Dany's men running the man down as he tried to flee. If that poisoner had never been sent, then my son and Stars would never have thought to launch a campaign to prepare for an invasion of Westeros. Drogo would be alive and my son would have been born safely. Instead they were both taken from me by blood magic. Varys dropped to one knee. Your Grace, I swear to you. The poisoner sent to find you was directed to make sure that the substance he gave you was one specially made at the request of King Robert. Unknown to the man, the liquid, in reality, was a harmless tonic. Why bother sending an assassin at all? Selmy asked. Varys did not shift his gaze from the floor. I did not know who else may have been watching. Pycelle, Littlefinger, I had at least to be seen acting on Robert's orders. If I was suspected of disobedience or disloyalty, I would have lost my position, and most likely my head. Either way, I would have been of little use to your Grace now. Dany pondered for a moment. As much as I may dislike the man, he is useful and has proven loyal. It was his plan to pretend to accept Lord Tywin's offer and land in Westeros, right at the doors of King's Landing, and take the city when the Lannisters were at their weakest. I would not be surprised if the little man was the one who suggested the idea of bringing me here to Lord Tywin in the first place. As if I would ever agree to ally with the family that betrayed and then murdered my father. She looked around the hall. Without Varys' work I could have spent years in Essos gathering enough power to reclaim the Seven Kingdoms, and yet here I am, in the great hall of the Red Keep before the thrones of my ancestors. Dany glanced down. In fact, the only wrinkle in this plan is the boy I see before me. I did not just depose one spoiled youth to sit another in his place. Still, first things first. She looked at the still kneeling figure of the eunuch. Rise, Lord Varys. You shall not be harmed this day. I wish to talk to you some more. Dany looked over the hall and, in particular, at the boy claiming to be her nephew. First though, I would wish to talk to Aegon alone. A murmur went up from the hall. Both Sir Barristan and Jorah Mormont looked at her with concern. But it was Jon Connington who spoke, his voice leaden with suspicion. What do you want with him? She forced a smile. Why, my lord? Why should an aunt not want to speak to her long-lost nephew? As you say, he is my only link to my beloved brother who fate so cruelly took from us. Connington was not convinced. Surely it would be better to have a council meeting, my lady. This is a matter of state. Dany looked mockingly at the lord. How so, my lord? I merely wish to speak to your ward. You need not be concerned. I mean no harm to him, there is no cause for fear. I am not afraid. Aegon replied instantly. He turned to Connington, who was in the middle of replying to her. Take the men and wait outside. Your Grace, Connington began. Leave us. Aegon said, reddening in anger. My aunt wishes to speak to me. Connington looked angrily at them both before motioning with his hand. The men of the Golden Company turned and began to make their way out of the hall. So easy to manipulate. She nodded to Grey Worm, who issued his own commands. The unsullied soldiers quickly filled out of the chamber the way they had come. Their precise footsteps echoing off the hall as they went. She cast a last lingering look at the throne before she turned and walked back down the steps. A sigh of regret escaped her lips, though she quickly quashed the dark thoughts. I will have time for such indulgences later. Dany quickly reached the base of the throne and she turned to speak to Jorah and Barristan. Carry on with our plans. I want the castle and the city completely under our control by daybreak. The two knights bowed to her and headed off wordlessly. Daario looked as if he was about to speak, but then, he too, left the hall. Though I suspect both he and Sir Barristan will be somewhere close by, keeping an eye on me. In but a few short moments the hall was emptied but for Dany and Aegon. They were quite close together now, separated by short space of floor and a few raised steps. Aegon looked at her, his eyes appeared violet in the torchlight. I have often thought of you, my lady. Really? I did not even know you existed until a few months ago. Until Illyrio Mopathis wrote to me in Meereen and informed me that I had allegedly had a relative. Dany clasped her hand in front of her. I confess, your existence was quite a shock to me. The youth smiled charmingly at her. A welcome one, I hope. It was a surprise she allowed. I had become accustomed to the thought of being the only Targaryen in this world. And the last if Mirai Masdew is to be believed. I suspect the fat merchant and the eunuch are to be blamed for keeping us apart. Aegon muttered. I wonder why they didn't want to unite us. It's obvious. Magister Illyrio and Lord Varys, two schemers if ever there were ones. They dreamed of a restored Targaryen dynasty. They had two potential heirs, with Viserys and herself, and now another in the form of this boy in front of her. Better to keep them apart in case accident should befall either of the parties. Viserys' death could certainly have been viewed as an accident. He most assuredly hadn't seen it coming. Plus, as Viserys got older, it must have been clear to all that he'd have rather killed this boy rather than suffer a potential rival. She nodded at the youth. I'm sure they had their reasons. The question before us is what to do now that we are together. Aegon looked at her thoughtfully. You must concede that I have the better claim. Her eyes flashed. I concede nothing of the sort, she said sharply. Now it was Aegon's turn to become angry. I am the son of Prince Rhaegar Targaryen. The children of the first son come before even the second child. You must see that. Must I? It seems to me that I must see nothing. The youth glowered at her. I am Rhaegar's heir. She tilted her head. You think you're Rhaegar's heir? Aegon's eyes narrowed. Think. Of course. Dany spread her arms. You can only allege who you say you are. You have no proof. You call me a liar. Not at all. She held up a hand to stay his outrage. I am willing to accept that you believe you are my brother's child. I suspect you were told that from the moment you could understand the concept, but the fact remains that there is no proof of your claims. Aegon's hands bunched into fists at his side, just as there is no proof of your lineage. She eyed him with a hint of humor. No one thinks I am dead. My lineage is not in doubt. Neither is mine. Aegon cried, his face almost as purple as his eyes. Setting that aside, Dany said, it seems to me that you would ask me to surrender my claim or, rather, accept the ascendancy of your own claim with absolutely no proof beyond the word of the opportunists who support you. Aegon bristled, shook his head. Lord Connington is a good man. Daenerys finished, loyal and true. Sir Barristan has vouched for him, and there can be no higher praise. If Lord Connington had been the one to take you from the royal apartments and travel with you to Essos, I would have believed it. Instead, you were retrieved by Varys. I'm sure you would agree that this tale, the story of your escape, is opportune at best. I agree to nothing. Aegon snarled. Dany suspected that had she not been who she was, the boy would have attacked her before now. She moved to defuse the situation. Regardless of who you think you are, I am Queen of Meereen. The Unsullied and the mercenary companies I traveled with are sworn to me. They will not serve you unless I order it, and I tell you now that I will not do so. I have fought and bled for my armies, spent years working to reclaim what was taken from our family. I will not surrender it on the eve of success simply because a boy with white hair and purple eyes walks in and tells me he may be my brother's son. Aegon paused, considering. Then he stepped towards her. Then let me prove it. Dany felt her heartbeat quicken. How would you suggest we do that? The youth spread his hands in invitation. I know you have 3 dragons with you. I saw you ride one into the city. Let them judge me. It was really too easy. Judge you. It was said that those who rode the dragons were blessed with the blood of old Valyria. Nowhere is that more true of House Targaryen. If I am related to your house, then let me prove it. Let me stand before your dragons and have them recognize me as someone of the blood. Is he so desperate for acknowledgement that he would willingly risk death just to prove himself? She nodded, seemingly lost in thought. She looked up at him. Very well, Aegon, let us see if you live up to your name. Khaleesi, I must protest. I have heard your protests, Ser Jorah, and dismissed them. They stood in a clearing in grounds of the Godswood of the Red Keep, surrounded by soldiers from both hers and Aegon's factions. The warriors formed a wide circle round the perimeter of the large open ground. Torches lit the night air, though they would soon be unnecessary. Dawn was fast approaching. She could already see the first lights of the new day as they broke across the water of Blackwater Bay. Was it only a few hours ago when I flew across the water and grasped my destiny? Behind her were Ser Jorah and Barristan Selmy, both had concern on their faces. Grey Worm stood with his unsullied looking as unperturbable as normal. "Is the city ours?" she asked Sir Barristan, fearing that if she asked the same question to Ser Jorah she'd receive another plea to forego her stated intention. "It is, your grace," the old knight declared, his voice threatening to break, "and the army of Prince Doran has been spotted approaching the city. I have sent a small host out to meet them and escort them in." "So soon? I had not expected them to have traveled through the Stormlands so quickly. It was expected that we'd have to aid them in fighting Stannis before too long." "Good," Dany said, musingly, "I am looking forward to meeting Prince Doran." Barristan bowed his head. "At dawn the city will wake to a new ruler." "You think too small. It will wake to a new world." Across the grass of the clearing was Aegon's party. She could see Lord Connington in a tense discussion with Aegon. For his part, Aegon appeared not to be paying attention, his gaze was set, his body relaxed. The boy had removed his armor and wore a simple tunic as he waited for her to summon him to the middle of the clearing. To the dragons. Drogon, Rhaegal and Viserion occupied the center of the open area, their large bodies and larger wings taking up a majority of the space. Her children were laying content on the ground, idly chewing on the carcasses of a number of goats that had been given to them as a reward for good behavior. The stench of burnt meat still filled the air, but Dany paid not attention. The dragons were so focused on their food that they ignored all the men around them. A large warrior walked from the tree line. The man wore large plate armor and had a kraken-shaped helm under one arm. She nodded to him. "Did you have any trouble coaxing them to land?" "No, my queen," the large man said, his voice rumbling like thunder. "The horn worked exactly as promised. Though the thralls who sounded it, both here and on Dragonstone, have now been taken ill." "Ah, then perhaps the horn is not everything Euron Greyjoy pretended it would be. Still, without the control the horn gives me I would never have been able to ride into the city." Dany acknowledged the man's words. She turned to him. "I was most lucky to have come across you, my Lord Victorian. And even more lucky to be able to enlist your service. I'm told you led the vanguard up the beach and into the city and fought with unparalleled skill." The large man looked at her with dead eyes. "My queen had need of me. There is nothing more to be said." "I disagree," Dany replied, turning to face her three children. "I have promised you the Iron Islands as payment for your service. Believe me, I will make good on that promise." My Queen Victorian grumbled in response. "A most useful man. If somewhat dour." She considered herself fortunate indeed that her fleet had encountered the Ironborn as they crossed from Pentos. Victorian had been sent to seek her out by his brother Euron to offer the terms of an alliance. The pact was simple. Euron would offer all the forces of the Iron Islands in exchange for Dany's hand in marriage. It seems that the Greyjoys had no love for the Lannisters either. They had moved to betray their erstwhile allies long before Tywin had lost the battle at Harrenhal. Dany had only had a passing interest in the offer. She had never met Euron, though neither Barristan of Jorah spoke well of him. They respected Victorian, as a warrior if nothing else, though being an Ironborn did not endear him to the mainland West AOC. She conceded there was something elemental about the Ironborn captain. The man was temperamental and strong, as unyielding as the sea itself. "He is a real man, much like Drogo." It helped that he had 5,000 men, almost the entire Iron Fleet under his command. She had made the captain a counter-offer. Something about Victorian gave her the sense that the man had no love for his brother, the man who he should owe allegiance to as his king. It had not taken much convincing to sway the warrior into serving with her. She had promised him the Iron Islands and a highborn lady for his wife. Men are so easily swayed. There was also the horn to consider. Euron had given the large object to Victorian to present to her as a gift. If Euron told it true, he had discovered it in the ruins of Old Valyria and, when used correctly, it was supposed to be able to tame dragons. She had not believed such a thing was possible until Victorian had had one of his crew sound the horn and her 3 dragons had alighted on the ground before them. After that it has been much easier to learn to ride one of them. She has practiced all the way across the narrow sea, and had particularly enjoyed using the beasts in conquering Dragonstone, her family's ancestral seat. The horn is a boon indeed, though it now seems that it is a tainted gift. The use of it comes with a cost. She was hopeful though that progress with it could be made. She would not have people become ill just so she could use the horn. The Red Priest traveling with Victorian had spent time studying the device and had promised that a way could be devised to utilize the horn without it injuring the user. I'll set the Maestus of Westeros to it as well. There must be a way. Dany made to walk forward when Ser Jorah spoke up once more. Is this necessary, Your Grace? You could just decry the boy as an impostor. She sighed. How many times? What then of the Golden Company? What of Dorne? We need their forces. Jorah looked at her imploringly. Neither will declare for your enemies. Perhaps not, but I don't need their inaction.